The camera lights are blinding, but not as harsh as the silence that follows my monologue. I stand center stage at the KBS Drama Center, sweat trickling down my spine beneath the tailored suit jacket I borrowed from my father. 5 industry executives sit behind a curved table, their faces masks of professional neutrality that I've learned to read like a death sentence. Cut. The casting director's voice slices through the air. Lee Sang-wook, a man whose approval can make careers overnight, removes his designer glasses and cleans them with deliberate slowness. Your interpretation of the character was technically proficient, Kim Jae-sung. The pause hangs in the air like smoke. I bow deeply, lower than necessary, a habit carved into my bones by 26 years of trying to prove I belong. Thank you for the opportunity, Director Lee. However, he continues, and my stomach drops. This particular role requires an actor who embodies the authentic Korean experience. You understand what I'm saying, don't you? The compact powder in my jacket pocket seems to burn against my chest. The same MAC foundation I applied in the bathroom 30 minutes ago, 2 shades lighter than my natural skin tone. The same ritual I've performed before every audition for the past 3 years, trying to erase the evidence of my mother's African-American heritage written across my features. Of course, I understand completely. I hear myself saying, though the words taste like ash. As I gather my script and headshot, executive producer Park Min-jung leans toward her colleague. She thinks her whisper is quiet, but the acoustics in this theater carry everything. Half-breeds just don't have the right look for our demographic. It's nothing personal. Half-breed. The words follow me through the lobby, down the elevator, past the security guard who won't meet my eyes. In the building's marble bathroom, I stare at my reflection. Features that tell 2 stories no one wants to hear simultaneously. My father's Korean eyes, sharp and expressive. My mother's fuller lips and the golden brown skin that no amount of makeup can completely transform. I pull out my phone, fingers hovering over Director Choi's number. He's been calling all week about his new play, something about racial identity and authentic representation. The lead role would require me to embrace exactly what I've spent years trying to hide. The bathroom door opens. Lee Sang-wook enters, doesn't acknowledge my presence, but I catch his reflection adjusting his tie in the mirror beside mine. 2 men, same ambitions, different worlds of possibility. My phone buzzes. A text from So Min, the journalist who's been interviewing me about diversity in Korean entertainment. How did the audition go? Coffee later? She doesn't know. About the makeup, about the constant performance, about the choice I make every single morning when I look in the mirror and decide which version of myself to present to the world. The contract from Director Choi is in my other pocket. The role that could change everything, if I have the courage to stop being half of who I am and start being twice as complete as everyone else. Lee Sang-wook leaves without a glance. I'm alone with my reflection, and the most dangerous question I've ever had to answer. Do I keep hiding? Or do I finally let them see all of me? If you've ever stood at the crossroads between who you are and who the world wants you to be, then stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt like they were living between 2 worlds. 3 months before that devastating audition, I discovered the power of MAC Studio Fix Fluid in NC20. 2 shades lighter than my natural NC35, it became my most trusted co-star in the performance of being acceptably Korean. Jae-sung, you're going to be late. My mother's voice carried up the stairs of our Gangnam apartment, tinged with the slight accent that 48 years in Seoul couldn't completely erase. Michelle Washington Kim still pronounced my name with a softness that made it sound like music, instead of the sharp, efficient syllables most Koreans preferred. I was 26 years old and still living at home, a fact that would embarrass most Korean men my age. But auditions didn't pay rent, and the few commercial roles I'd booked weren't enough to afford a place in this neighborhood where appearances mattered more than authenticity. Standing before my bathroom mirror, I applied the foundation with practiced precision. Forehead, cheeks, chin, carefully blending until the evidence of my dual heritage became whispered rather than declared. The transformation was subtle but crucial. The difference between being seen as interestingly exotic versus problematically foreign. My phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Another casting call, this one for a soju commercial. Seeking authentic Korean male, 25-30, traditional good looks preferred. The word authentic always made my chest tighten. In Korean entertainment, authentic meant pure, and pure meant homogeneous, and homogeneous meant not me. Jae-sung! This time it was my father's voice, Kim Dong-woo, calling from downstairs. His tone carried the weight of punctuality obsession that came from running an import business where every minute meant money. I capped the foundation bottle and slipped it into my jacket pocket alongside my headshots. Professional photos taken with studio lighting that flattered my features into something more conventionally Korean. The photographer had been expensive, but he specialized in what he called heritage adjustment photography, a euphemism for making mixed-race actors look more marketable to conservative casting directors. Downstairs, my parents were finishing breakfast at the kitchen island. My father wore his standard navy suit, reading the Chosun Ilbo while sipping American coffee, one of the few concessions to my mother's heritage that he allowed in public view. My mother was dressed for her consulting job, a red blazer that made her dark skin glow with confidence I envied. "Big audition today?" she asked, studying my face with the intensity of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. I nodded, avoiding her gaze. "Drama pilot for NBC. Supporting role, but it's a good opportunity." "You look..." She paused, and I knew she'd noticed. The slight pallor that wasn't quite natural, the way the makeup sat on my skin like a mask. Different. My father glanced up from his newspaper. "He looks professional. That's what matters in this business." The words hung between us like a bridge neither wanted to cross. My mother's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. A micro-expression I'd learned to read over years of watching her navigate Seoul society as a black woman married to a Korean businessman. "I should go," I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. "Jae-sung," my mother called softly. "Remember who you are." But that was exactly the problem. I was never entirely sure. The audition was in Uido, in one of those glass towers that scraped the sky with corporate ambition. I arrived 30 minutes early, a habit born from the knowledge that I needed to be twice as prepared as everyone else to receive half the consideration. The waiting room was filled with other young men, all unmistakably, authentically Korean. They chatted comfortably among themselves, sharing industry gossip and connections I could never access. I sat apart, reviewing my lines and trying not to think about the compact powder burning a hole in my pocket, like evidence of my ongoing deception. When they called my name, I walked into that audition room carrying 26 years of pretending to be less complicated than I actually was. The role was for a Chaebol heir's best friend, someone loyal, trustworthy, and undeniably Korean. I performed the scene flawlessly. Every line delivered with perfect diction, every gesture calibrated for maximum authenticity. I was the Korean son my father wanted, the assimilated success my mother feared, and the unthreatening diversity token the industry could point to when accused of homogeneity. But as I bowed and thanked them for their time, I caught my reflection in the studio's mirror wall. For just a moment, the lighting was harsh enough to reveal what the makeup couldn't quite hide, the truth of who I actually was. Walking back to the subway, I passed a street vendor selling hotteok, the sweet pancakes that had been my childhood comfort food. The ajumma running the stall looked at me with the particular intensity Koreans reserve for trying to place someone who didn't quite fit their categories. "Foreigner?" she asked in English. "Korean," I replied in perfect Seoul dialect. She studied my face, clearly unconvinced but too polite to argue further. I bought a hotteok and walked away, tasting the brown sugar and cinnamon while wondering how many more times I'd have to prove my citizenship to my own country. My phone rang as I descended into Uido Station. Director Choi Min-ho, my former acting teacher, and one of the few industry professionals who knew my full story. Jae Sung-ah, I have a proposition that might interest you. His voice crackled through the connection. But it would require tremendous courage. I found an empty corner of the platform, pressing the phone closer to my ear. What kind of courage? The kind that stops hiding and starts healing. His words hit me like a revelation I wasn't ready to receive, because deep down, I knew exactly what he meant. The question was whether I was finally ready to listen. Director Choi Min-ho's theater occupied the basement of an old building in Hongdae, the kind of space where Seoul's artistic rebels gathered to create work that challenged everything polite society preferred to ignore. The walls were painted black, decorated with posters from productions that had been too honest for mainstream audiences. "You look lighter," was the first thing he said when I arrived, his sharp eyes taking in my carefully applied makeup. At 58, Choi had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades fighting losing battles against cultural conformity. His graying hair was perpetually messy, as if he'd been running his hands through it while wrestling with impossible artistic visions. "I have an audition later," I said, though we both knew that wasn't an explanation. He gestured for me to sit on one of the mismatched chairs scattered around the rehearsal space. "That's exactly what I want to talk about. How many auditions have you booked in the past year?" The question stung, because the answer was embarrassing. 3 commercials and a web drama cameo. "And how many times did you have to diminish yourself to get those roles?" I didn't answer, because we both knew the truth would be too damaging to say out loud. Choi picked up a script from his desk, its pages already worn from handling. "I've been developing a play about identity, authenticity, and the cost of belonging. It's called Mirror's Edge, and it needs someone brave enough to perform his own truth instead of hiding from it." He handed me the script. The protagonist was named Jin Woo, a mixed-race Korean-American actor struggling to find his place in Seoul's entertainment industry. The parallels were so obvious they felt like an accusation. "This character," I began, "is you if you had the courage to stop apologizing for existing." Choi's voice was gentle but firm. "The lead role would require you to appear as yourself. No makeup, no adjustments, no performance of acceptability. Just truth." My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through the pages. The dialogue was raw, honest, filled with conversations I'd only had in my head during sleepless nights. Monologues about feeling like a perpetual outsider in your own country. Scenes about family pressure and romantic rejection, and the exhausting performance of proving your worthiness to belong. Who would produce something like this? I asked. Me, with private funding from investors who believe Korean theater needs to evolve. But Jae Sung, you need to understand what accepting this role would mean. No more hiding. No more makeup. No more pretending to be simpler than you are. The weight of his words settled in my chest like stones. Everything I'd built, my careful reputation, my relationships, my family's social standing, depended on maintaining the fiction that I could successfully pass as conventionally Korean when necessary. "I need time to think," I said. "Of course. But while you're thinking, consider this. How long can you keep performing yourself before you forget who you actually are?" I left the theater with the script burning in my bag like contraband. On the subway home, I watched Seoul blur past the windows, a city that had raised me but never quite claimed me as its own. Every stop brought us through neighborhoods where my childhood had played out in fragments of belonging and rejection. At Gangnam Station, I transferred to the line that would take me home. The evening rush hour crowd pressed around me. Hundreds of faces that shared variations of the same features, the same story, the same unquestioned right to exist here without explanation. I envied their certainty. My phone buzzed with a text from So-min. Interview tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'm writing about diversity in Korean entertainment. Your perspective would be valuable. Park So-min was a cultural journalist for the Korea Herald, one of the few English-language publications that covered entertainment with any depth. We'd met at a film screening 2 months ago, introduced by a mutual friend who thought we'd have interesting conversations. She was intelligent, curious, and had the kind of natural beauty that didn't require the performance enhancement industry that kept people like me employed. More importantly, she looked at me without the subtle confusion that usually clouded people's faces when they tried to categorize my ethnicity. When So-min talked to me, I felt like she was seeing a complete person, rather than a collection of features that didn't quite add up to familiar. Yes, I texted back, looking forward to it. The subway car swayed gently as we approached my stop. I caught my reflection in the dark window and, for a moment, saw myself without the softening filter of intentional lighting. The makeup was beginning to fade after the long day, revealing the natural color of my skin, the fuller shape of my lips, the subtle differences that marked me as someone whose story couldn't be contained within Korea's traditional narratives. A businessman across the aisle was staring at me with the particular intensity I'd learned to recognize. That moment when someone was trying to solve the puzzle of my appearance. Korean, but not quite. Asian, but something more. Familiar, but definitively other. I turned away from both his gaze and my reflection, focusing instead on the script in my bag. Director Choi's words echoed in my memory. How long can you keep performing yourself before you forget who you actually are? The answer was becoming increasingly clear. I was already forgetting. Every morning when I applied that foundation, every audition where I minimized my story, every moment when I chose acceptability over authenticity, I was erasing pieces of myself until what remained was barely recognizable even to me. But the alternative, standing on a stage and declaring the fullness of who I was, felt like volunteering for crucifixion in a society that had spent centuries perfecting the art of excluding anyone who didn't fit their carefully maintained image of racial purity. As the train pulled into my station, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I would meet with So-min tomorrow and, for the first time in years, try to tell the complete truth about what it meant to be twice different in a country that barely tolerated being different once. The question was whether I was finally ready to face the consequences of that honesty. The cafe So-min chose was in Itaewon, Seoul's international district where diversity wasn't an anomaly, but an expectation. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered privacy and multiple exit routes. Habits developed from a lifetime of conversations that could turn uncomfortable without warning. She walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. Her long black hair catching the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Park So-min moved with the confident grace of someone who belonged wherever she chose to be, a quality I found both attractive and enviable. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Her notebook was already open, a professional digital recorder positioned between us like a bridge. "I hope you don't mind, but I want to record this. My article is about the lived experiences of actors from diverse backgrounds." The word diverse made my stomach clench. In Korean media, diverse was often code for problematic, a euphemism that acknowledged difference while simultaneously questioning its value. "What exactly do you want to know?" I asked, ordering an Americano from the server who appeared with characteristic Korean efficiency. So-min studied my face with the intensity of someone trained to notice details others missed. "Start with the beginning. When did you first realize that your appearance might affect your career opportunities?" The question was direct enough to be dangerous. I'd spent years perfecting deflective answers to these kinds of inquiries, responses that acknowledged challenges without admitting to discrimination, that validated concerns without placing blame. Every actor faces certain limitations based on their physical characteristics, I began, falling into the safe language I'd rehearsed. Typecasting is universal in entertainment industries worldwide. She leaned forward slightly. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking when you first understood that being mixed race would specifically limit your opportunities in Korea. The recorder sat between us, its tiny red light blinking like a heartbeat. Everything I said would be preserved, potentially published, definitely permanent. The smart move was to continue deflecting, to maintain the careful performance of not being too controversial or too truthful. Instead, I heard myself saying, I was 7 years old. So-min's expression softened, encouraging me to continue. There was a school play. I wanted to be the prince, but my teacher said I would be better suited for other roles. She suggested I could play a foreign merchant or perhaps a servant from distant lands. Even at 7, I understood that distant lands meant anywhere but here. The words felt strange in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd forgotten. Truth had its own texture, different from the smooth fabrications I'd perfected. How did your parents respond? My father told me that working twice as hard would eventually overcome any disadvantages. My mother said that Korea would change, that by the time I was an adult, things would be different. I paused, watching steam rise from my coffee. She was wrong about the timeline. So-min made notes while maintaining eye contact, a skill that suggested genuine interest rather than professional obligation. What about now? How do you navigate the industry as an adult? This was the dangerous territory, the place where honesty could destroy everything I'd carefully built. I adapt, I said carefully. How specifically do you adapt? Her persistence was both admirable and terrifying. I looked around the cafe, filled with expatriate professionals and Korean locals who chose to exist in this bubble of international acceptance. Here, my appearance didn't require explanation or apology. Here, I could almost forget the performance I maintained in the rest of Seoul. Sometimes adaptation means making choices about presentation that maximize opportunities for connection, I said, the euphemisms feeling heavy on my tongue. So-min's pen stopped moving. Are you talking about makeup? The question hit like a physical blow. I stared at her, wondering how she could possibly know. I've interviewed dozens of mixed-race entertainers, she continued gently. The patterns become obvious after a while. Skin lightening, hair straightening, surgical procedures designed to make features more conventionally Korean. It's so common that there are specialized makeup artists who advertise these services specifically to actors from diverse backgrounds. My carefully constructed defenses crumbled. Yes, I whispered. How long have you been doing it? 3 years, since I started auditioning seriously. The admission felt like bleeding. MAC Studio Fix Fluid in NC20, 2 shades lighter than my natural tone. She nodded without judgment, making notes that would probably end my career if published. How does it feel when you look in the mirror after applying it? Like I'm erasing my mother from my face. The words escaped before I could stop them, raw and honest enough to make us both pause. So-min looked up from her notebook, her expression shifting from professional interest to something more personal. That must be incredibly painful, she said softly. The painful part is that it works. I book more auditions. I get taken more seriously. I become more acceptably Korean with each application. I laughed bitterly. My mother escaped segregation in 1970s America, only to watch her son voluntarily segregate himself from half of his identity. So-min reached across the table, her hand briefly covering mine. The gesture was professional comfort becoming something more intimate. What would happen if you stopped? She asked. I'd probably stop working. But you'd start existing. Her words hung between us like a challenge. I studied her face, trying to understand how a conventional Korean woman could so easily grasp the complexity of my situation. "Why does this story matter to you?" I asked. For the first time since we'd sat down, So-min hesitated. "Because I've spent my life watching people hide parts of themselves to fit into spaces that were never designed for their full humanity. And because I think Korea is ready for more honest conversations about who we are and who we're becoming." She paused the recorder. "Off the record, I think you're brave for continuing to try, even if you're trying in ways that cost you pieces of yourself." "I don't feel brave. I feel like a coward who's become too skilled at his own erasure." "Then maybe it's time to try a different kind of courage." As we prepared to leave, So-min handed me her business card. On the back, she'd written her personal number. "If you ever want to have a conversation that's completely off the record, call me." Sometimes the most important stories happen when we're not trying to tell them. Walking back to the subway, I felt exposed in a way that was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in years, someone had seen through my performance and still chosen to sit with me, to listen, to understand. But I also realized I'd just confessed to Korea's most respected cultural journalist that I'd been systematically deceiving casting directors about my racial identity. The story she was writing could end my career before it ever truly began. The question was whether truth was worth the inevitable consequences of telling it. That evening, I sat in my bedroom reading director Choi's script while my parents' voices drifted up from the kitchen. They were speaking in English, which usually meant they were discussing something too sensitive for casual eavesdropping by neighbors or household staff. "He's losing himself, Dongwoo." My mother's voice carried a pain that made my chest tight. "Every morning I watch him become less of who he actually is." "He's adapting to succeed in a competitive industry," my father replied, but his tone lacked conviction. "We moved here to give him opportunities, Michelle. This is what opportunity looks like in Korea." I closed the script and moved closer to my bedroom door, feeling guilty for listening but unable to stop. "Opportunity shouldn't require self-erasure," my mother said. "In Atlanta, he'd be celebrated for his heritage, not punished for it. We're not in Atlanta. We're here, and here has different rules." "Whose rules? The same people who made you lose the Samsung contract because you married a black woman?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. My father had never told me about losing business because of their interracial marriage. I'd always assumed their love story was one of triumph over cultural differences, not ongoing sacrifice in the face of persistent prejudice. "That was different," he finally said, his voice barely audible through the floor. "Business relationships are complicated. Jae-sung's situation is what? Less important? Less damaging? More visible. If he succeeds as an entertainer, everything about our family becomes public. Every interview, every red carpet, every award ceremony. Are you ready for that level of scrutiny of our choices?" My mother's laugh was sharp with bitter understanding. "I've been living with that scrutiny for 28 years. The question is whether our son should have to pay the price for our courage." I moved away from the door, unable to hear more. The script lay open on my desk to a monologue where Jin-woo confronts his parents about the cost of their love story on his identity development. The parallels were so precise they felt like surveillance. My phone buzzed with a text from So-min. "Thank you for your honesty today. The article will be sensitive but truthful. You're braver than you realize." I stared at the message, wondering if she would still think I was brave, if she knew I was upstairs hiding from a conversation about my own life, while my parents negotiated the ongoing consequences of choices they'd made before I was born. The bedroom door opened without warning. My mother stood in the threshold, still wearing her business attire, but with her composed professional expression replaced by maternal concern. "We need to talk," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed without invitation. I turned my chair to face her, trying to prepare for a conversation I'd been avoiding for 3 years. "I know about the makeup, Jae-sung." The words hit like a physical blow. "Mom, I know because I used to do the same thing." She held up her hand to stop my protest. "Different makeup, same reason. When I first moved to Seoul, I tried everything to minimize the ways I stood out. Lighter foundation, different hair textures, clothing that made me blend into crowds more effectively." I stared at her, trying to reconcile this admission with the confident woman who'd raised me to be proud of my heritage. It took me years to understand that assimilation and acceptance aren't the same thing. I could make myself less visibly foreign, but I couldn't make Korea less racist. The problem was never my appearance. The problem was a society that hadn't learned to see beauty in diversity. "But you stopped," I said. "You found a way to succeed while still being yourself. I found a way to survive while maintaining my dignity. Success is more complicated." She paused, studying my face with the intensity that had made her an effective international consultant. "Your father lost that Samsung contract because someone saw photos of our wedding and decided that his business judgment was questionable if he would marry outside his race. We never told you because we didn't want your childhood to be shadowed by adult failures." The revelation sat in my chest like a stone. "How much have you sacrificed because of me?" "Nothing we didn't choose willingly." "But Jae-sung, the question isn't what we sacrificed. The question is what you're sacrificing now, and whether that sacrifice is creating the life you actually want." I pulled the MAC compact from my desk drawer, holding it like evidence in my own trial. "This makes everything easier. Easier isn't the same as better." She took the compact from my hands, examining it with the careful attention she gave to contracts she was about to reject. "When I see you wearing this, I see my mother in 1960s Alabama, straightening her hair with hot combs and bleaching cream because she believed that proximity to whiteness would provide safety. It didn't work for her, and it won't work for you. Korea isn't Alabama in the 1960s. Racism adapts to its environment, baby. It becomes more polite, more subtle, more systemic. But the fundamental message remains the same. You are acceptable only insofar as you can approximate what we consider normal." She placed the compact on my desk, its presence suddenly feeling like a monument to my own cowardice. "There's a young journalist who interviewed you today," she continued. I looked up sharply. "How do you know about that?" "Because she called me. She wanted to understand the family context behind your story. We had a very illuminating conversation." And my heart rate accelerated. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That we raised you to be proud of your entire heritage, but that society has trained you to be ashamed of half of it. That watching you diminish yourself breaks our hearts in ways you can't imagine. She's going to destroy my career with that article. Or she's going to help you find a career worth having." My mother stood, smoothing her skirt with the precise movements that signaled the end of a difficult business meeting. "Your father and I immigrated to Korea because we believed this country was changing, becoming more open to international perspectives. We had faith that by the time you were an adult, there would be space for all of who you are. Maybe we were wrong about the timeline, but we weren't wrong about the destination." At the door, she paused. "That young director called today, Choi Min-ho. He's offering you a role that would require tremendous courage. Your father thinks you should decline. I think you should accept. But ultimately, the choice is yours. What if I'm not brave enough? Then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you had been." After she left, I sat alone with Director Choi's script and my mother's makeup compact, two objects representing opposite approaches to existing in a world that wasn't designed for someone like me. The script demanded that I show up fully, authentically, risking everything I'd carefully constructed. The compact promised continued access to opportunities that required me to diminish myself. For the first time in years, the choice felt clear, even if the consequences remained terrifying. I picked up my phone and dialed Director Choi's number. "I want to read for Jinwoo," I said when he answered. "No makeup, no adjustments, no performance of acceptability. Just truth. Are you sure you're ready for that level of exposure?" I looked at my reflection in the darkened window, seeing my face without filters or enhancement for the first time in months. "I'm ready to find out." Director Choi's theater was packed with industry professionals when I arrived for what he'd called a private reading, but felt more like a tribunal. Casting directors, producers, theater critics, and several actors I recognized from major productions sat in folding chairs arranged in a semicircle around the small stage. I stood in the wings wearing my natural face for the first time in years at a professional event. No MAC Studio Fix fluid, no careful color correction, no strategic lighting to minimize the evidence of my mother's heritage. Just the truth of who I actually was, written across features that told two stories simultaneously. "You ready for this?" Director Choi asked, appearing beside me with the intensity that suggested this reading would determine more than just casting decisions. "I'm ready to try." "Good. Because there are people in that audience who can make or break careers, and they're here specifically to see if Korean theater is ready for authentic diversity." Through the gap in the curtains, I could see Park Hae-jin, the most influential theater critic in Seoul, seated in the front row with a notebook already open. Beside her sat Lee Sang-wook, the same casting director who'd rejected me with the half-breed comment 3 months ago. My phone buzzed with a text from So-min. "Break a leg. Show them who you really are." Director Choi handed me the script, though I'd memorized Jinwoo's opening monologue days ago. "Remember, this character isn't performing acceptability. He's declaring his right to exist as he is." The lights dimmed, and I walked onto that stage carrying 26 years of hiding, 3 years of makeup, and a lifetime of wondering whether Korea would ever have space for someone like me. The monologue began with Jinwoo staring at his reflection, wrestling with the same compact powder I'd been using. But instead of applying it, he begins to speak about the cost of constant performance. "Every morning, I wake up and decide which version of myself to present to the world," I began, my voice carrying to the back of the small theater. "The version that's Korean enough to belong, or the version that's authentic enough to recognize in mirrors." The audience was silent, attentive in a way that felt different from polite theater etiquette. This was the silence of people confronting ideas they'd never been forced to consider. My mother fled American racism only to watch her son voluntarily participate in Korean racism. My father lost business contracts because he married outside his race, but tells me that adaptation is the price of opportunity. Everyone has an opinion about how I should exist, but no one asks what it costs me to exist as half of who I am. Lee Sang-wook shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Recognition flickered across his face. The same actor he'd dismissed was now commanding attention in ways he'd never bothered to notice. The monologue built to its central question. What if the problem isn't that I'm not Korean enough? What if the problem is that Korea hasn't learned to see Koreanness as something that can include all of who I am? The final section required me to confront an imaginary casting director, to articulate the specific ways that entertainment industry discrimination had shaped my choices and limited my possibilities. "You want authentic Korean stories?" I said, directing the words toward Lee Sang-wook without breaking character. "Then let me tell you about growing up Korean in Seoul while looking like evidence of globalization that makes some people uncomfortable. Let me tell you about learning perfect Seoul dialect while knowing that perfect would never be enough to overcome imperfect genetics." The monologue ended with Jinwoo discarding his makeup compact and declaring, "I'm not half of anything. I'm twice as complete as anyone who's never had to fight for the right to be fully themselves." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then, from the back of the theater, came the sound of one person clapping. Others joined gradually, until the entire audience was applauding with an intensity that suggested something significant had just occurred. Director Choi appeared beside me, his face bright with vindication and relief. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Jin Woo in Mirror's Edge, opening next month at this theater." During the reception that followed, industry professionals approached me with a mixture of curiosity and respect I'd never experienced. Several casting directors introduced themselves, expressing interest in working with actors who could bring authentic diversity to their projects. But the most meaningful conversation came from Lee Sang-wook, who approached me near the exit with an expression of genuine contrition. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying the weight of professional embarrassment. "My comment 3 months ago was inappropriate and discriminatory. After seeing your performance tonight, I realize I've been making casting decisions based on prejudices I didn't recognize in myself. The apology was unexpected enough to leave me speechless. I'd like to offer you a supporting role in our upcoming drama," he continued. "The character is written as mixed race, and we need someone who can bring authentic experience to the part." I stared at him, trying to process the possibility that honesty might actually create opportunities rather than destroying them. "The role would require you to appear as yourself," he added. "No adjustments, no enhancements, just authentic representation." "I'll consider it," I said, though every instinct was screaming acceptance. As the reception wound down, I found myself alone with Director Choi in the empty theater. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Terrifying, liberating, like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure if I'm flying or falling." "That's what courage feels like," he said. "The question is what you do next." My phone rang. So-min's name appeared on the screen. "I was there," she said without preamble when I answered. "In the back row. Your performance was extraordinary." "You were there? Why didn't you?" "Because tonight was about you finding your voice, not me documenting it. But Jae-sung, you need to know that everything just changed. Not just for you, but for everyone who looks like you and dreams of careers in Korean entertainment." Walking home through Seoul's neon-lit streets, I felt simultaneously exposed and protected. For the first time in years, I was moving through the city as my complete self, no longer performing acceptability, but simply existing. The Mac Compact was still sitting on my bedroom desk when I arrived home, but it felt like a relic from someone else's life. Tomorrow, I would wake up and look in the mirror without the ritual of transformation that had defined my mornings for 3 years. The question was whether I was ready for whatever that authentic reflection would require of me. So-min suggested we meet at Banpo-han River Park, away from the cafe culture, where our conversations might be overheard by industry professionals or cultural commentators looking for their next controversy. The setting sun painted Seoul's skyline in shades of gold and pink as I found her sitting on the grass near the water's edge, a picnic spread beside her like an invitation to a different kind of interview. "I brought food," she said when I approached, gesturing to containers of kimbap, fried chicken, and fresh strawberries. I thought we might talk better without the formality of tables and recording equipment. I settled beside her on the blanket, close enough to catch her perfume, something light and floral that reminded me of spring mornings. She'd exchanged her professional attire for jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger, more approachable, like someone I might have met in university, rather than across a journalist's notebook. "Your performance last night was remarkable," she said, opening the kimbap container and offering me a piece. "But how are you feeling now, after choosing to expose yourself so completely?" "Like I spent 26 years holding my breath and finally learned how to exhale." I accepted the food, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange, but also terrified about what comes next. "What scares you most?" The question was gentle but probing, delivered in the tone that had made me trust her with information I'd never shared with anyone else. Around us, families were having evening picnics, couples were taking selfies against the river backdrop, and groups of friends were sharing food and laughter. We could have been any young couple enjoying spring weather, except that our conversation carried the weight of identity politics and career consequences. That I'll wake up tomorrow and realize I've destroyed everything I've spent years building, I admitted. Or worse, that I'll wake up and realize I want to go back to performing acceptability because it's easier than fighting for space to be myself. So-min studied my face with the intensity that had first caught my attention at that film screening. Do you think you could go back? After last night? I don't know. Part of me misses the simplicity of having one version of myself to present to the world, even if that version was incomplete. What about the part of you that doesn't miss it? I looked across the river at Seoul's skyline, thinking about the question. That part feels like it's been waiting my entire life to finally breathe. She nodded, making mental notes without the formality of written documentation. I've been thinking about your story since our first interview. Not just as a journalist, but as someone trying to understand how identity works in contemporary Korea. And what conclusions have you reached? That you're pioneering something important. Not just for mixed-race actors, but for everyone who's ever felt like they needed permission to exist as their complete selves in Korean society. The words settled between us like a challenge. I reached for a strawberry, needing something sweet to counteract the intensity of the conversation. What about you? I asked. Have you ever felt like you needed to perform a version of yourself to fit into Korean expectations? So-min's expression shifted, becoming more personal than professional. Every Korean woman has. We're expected to be successful but not threatening, intelligent but not challenging, independent but still marriageable. The performance is just more subtle than yours. But you're not mixed race. You don't have to justify your right to be Korean. No, but I have to justify my right to write about subjects that make people uncomfortable. My editor questioned whether a Korean woman could objectively cover diversity issues. Some colleagues suggested I was being too sympathetic to foreign perspectives. The revelation surprised me. I had no idea you were facing professional pressure because of your coverage. Journalism that challenges social assumptions always comes with risks. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But some stories are important enough to risk comfort for truth. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in deeper shades of orange and red. Other picnickers were packing up, leaving the park to couples and families comfortable with evening temperatures. So-min moved closer on the blanket, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Can I ask you something personal? She said, her voice softer now, more intimate than professional. After everything I've already told you, I think personal questions are inevitable. When you look at me, what do you see? The question caught me off guard. I studied her face, taking in the delicate features that represented everything Korean society considered beautiful and appropriate. I see someone who's brave enough to ask questions that make people uncomfortable. Someone who listens without judgment. Someone who makes me feel like my story matters. Do you see someone who could love all of who you are? The directness of her question made my heart race. I see someone I'm terrified of disappointing. Why would you disappoint me? Because dating me means dating controversy. It means being questioned about your choices, having people wonder what's wrong with you that you couldn't find a normal Korean boyfriend. It means your family asking why you're making things complicated when simple would be easier. So-min reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt both natural and revolutionary. What if I told you that I've never been interested in simple? I'd say you don't understand how complicated this could get. Then explain it to me. I looked at our joined hands, Korean and mixed-race fingers creating a new pattern against the blanket. My visibility is increasing. Director Choi's play, the role Lee Sang-wook offered, your article when it's published. Everything is going to make me more recognizable, more controversial. Dating me won't be a private choice anymore. It'll be a public statement about racial politics and social change. And you think I'm not strong enough to handle that kind of scrutiny? I think you're strong enough to handle anything. I'm worried about whether I'm worth it. She turned to face me fully, her expression serious but warm. Jae-sung, do you know what I thought when I first saw you perform last night? I shook my head. I thought, this is what courage looks like when it stops apologizing for existing. And then I thought, this is someone I could fall in love with. The words hung in the evening air like a confession and a challenge simultaneously. Around us, Seoul's lights were beginning to twinkle as the city transitioned from day to night. But I felt like we existed in our own bubble of possibility and risk. So Min, I began, but she interrupted me. I know what you're going to say, that I should think carefully about what dating you would mean, that I should consider the professional consequences and the social pressure and the family complications. But here's what I want you to understand. I'm not choosing to care about you despite those challenges. I'm choosing to care about you because of who you are when facing those challenges. She leaned closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. The question isn't whether I'm brave enough to love you. The question is whether you're brave enough to let me. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent notification. A text from my father. Come home immediately. Family emergency. The spell of the moment broke as reality intruded with typical brutal timing. So-min saw my expression change and immediately began packing up the picnic. Go, she said simply. But Jae-sung, I looked back at her as I stood. This conversation isn't finished. Racing home on the subway, I carried the weight of her words and the terror of what a family emergency might mean for parents who'd already sacrificed so much because of their unconventional choices. But underneath the worry, something new was blooming. The possibility that someone could see all of me and choose to stay anyway. The question was whether my family crisis would destroy that possibility before it had a chance to grow. The family emergency turned out to be my paternal grandmother, who had arrived unannounced from Busan with enough luggage to suggest an extended stay and enough disapproval to poison the atmosphere in our usually peaceful home. Kim Hee-suk was 82 years old, 4 feet 11 inches of traditional Korean values, and possessed of the particular brand of gentle cruelty that comes disguised as concern for family honor. Jae-sung, she said when I entered the living room, her voice carrying the deceptive warmth that preceded most of her character assassinations. Come sit with your Halmioni. We have much to discuss. My parents were positioned like defendants awaiting judgment. My mother perched uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa, while my father paced near the window with the nervous energy of a man caught between competing loyalties. Halmioni, what brings you to Seoul? I asked, settling into the chair across from her with the careful distance I'd learned to maintain during her infrequent visits. Your father called me yesterday with very interesting news about your recent theatrical activities, she began, her eyes sharp with intelligence and judgment. It seems you've decided to make a public spectacle of our family's private business. I glanced at my father, who avoided eye contact with the skill of someone well-practiced in avoiding family confrontations. If you're referring to my performance in Director Choi's play, I'm referring to your decision to stand on a stage and announce to all of Seoul that you're proud to be, what was the phrase, twice as complete as normal Korean people. Her voice made the words sound like blasphemy. Do you understand what this kind of attention will do to our family's reputation? My mother spoke for the first time since I'd arrived. Hee-suk, Jae-sung was simply expressing pride in his heritage. His heritage, my grandmother interrupted, includes being Korean, which should be sufficient for any reasonable person. This obsession with celebrating foreign blood is a Western disease that has infected too many of our young people. The words hit like a physical slap. I'd heard variations of this argument throughout my childhood, but never delivered with such direct cruelty by someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Halmione, I said carefully, I've never rejected being Korean. I've spent my entire life trying to prove that I belong here. And now, you're trying to prove that Korea should change to accommodate you, rather than accepting that some sacrifices are necessary for social harmony. She adjusted her traditional hanbok with the precision of someone delivering a carefully rehearsed speech. Your father built a successful business by understanding that personal desires must sometimes be subordinated to collective good. Why can't you learn the same lesson? My father finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Mother, Jae-sung is pursuing his dreams with courage and integrity. Isn't that what we raised him to do? I raised you to understand that individual glory means nothing if it destroys family stability, she replied sharply. And now I discover that he's not content with embarrassing us professionally. He's also pursuing a romantic relationship with a woman whose family will never accept him. The mention of Somin made my blood freeze. How do you know about Somin? Because Park Halmoni and I have been friends for 60 years, and she called me in great distress about her granddaughter's inexplicable attraction to someone so unsuitable. The pause before unsuitable carried decades of coded racism. That poor woman is beside herself with worry about what her neighbors will think. My mother's controlled composure finally cracked. Unsuitable. My son is educated, talented, respectful, and kind. What exactly makes him unsuitable besides genetics he had no control over? Michelle, my grandmother's voice became dangerously soft. You've never understood that good intentions don't erase social realities. Your son can be as talented as he likes, but he will always be seen as foreign by people who matter in Korean society. Encouraging him to embrace that foreignness publicly only makes the situation worse. Whose situation? I asked, my voice rising despite my attempts to remain respectful. Mine or yours? Because I've spent 26 years trying to make other people comfortable with my existence, and I'm finally learning that their comfort isn't my responsibility. Your comfort isn't more important than family stability, she snapped back. Do you know that your father's brother has stopped speaking to us because of the attention your little theatrical performance has generated? Do you care that business associates are questioning your father's judgment? Do you understand that your selfishness has consequences for people who love you? The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock my parents had received as a wedding gift from relatives who'd never quite accepted their marriage. If loving me means being ashamed of me, I said quietly, then maybe the problem isn't my selfishness. My grandmother's face hardened with the expression I recognized from childhood moments when I'd pushed too far against her expectations. Pride is a luxury for people who don't have to worry about belonging. You were born with obstacles that require different strategies. Success means learning to work within limitations, not demanding that limitations be removed. What if I don't want to succeed at the cost of denying half of who I am? Then you're naive about how the world works, and your parents have failed to prepare you for reality. The accusation hung in the air like poison. I could see the pain in my parents' faces, the weight of criticism from a woman whose approval had shaped their adult choices for decades. My phone buzzed with a text from Somin. Thinking of you. Hope everything is okay with your family. The simple message felt like a lifeline thrown into churning water. Halmione, I said, standing to leave. I respect your concerns about family reputation and social consequences, but I can't live my life according to fears about what other people might think. I've tried that approach and it nearly destroyed me. And where has this new approach led you? To a relationship that will never be accepted, and a career that depends on making Korean audiences uncomfortable. Is that the success you imagined? It's led me to the possibility of being happy as myself, instead of successful as someone else. I moved toward the door, but her final words stopped me cold. That park girl will leave you the moment her family applies real pressure. Foreign novelty is entertaining until it becomes inconvenient. Don't sacrifice everything stable in your life for something that won't last. Walking to my room, I carried the weight of her predictions and the fear that she might be right. How much pressure could someone like So-min withstand from family members who saw our relationship as a threat to everything they valued? And how much could I ask her to endure for the uncertain promise of loving someone the world considered unsuitable? The question haunted me through a sleepless night, filled with the sound of my grandmother's disapproval echoing through our suddenly fragile home. The next morning brought revelations that shattered what remained of my childhood illusions about family history and individual choice. I woke to find my grandmother sitting at the kitchen table with photo albums spread around her, like evidence in a trial. My mother across from her with the rigid posture of someone preparing for battle. "Sit down, Jae-sung," my grandmother commanded without looking up from the photographs. "It's time you understood the full context of your parents' choices and their consequences." My mother's expression warned me to prepare for information I might not want to receive. "Jae-sung, you don't have to—" "Yes, he does," my grandmother interrupted. "Because his current decisions suggest he doesn't understand what this family has already sacrificed for his existence." I poured coffee with hands that weren't entirely steady, settling into the chair between two women who'd been locked in ideological warfare for 28 years. My grandmother opened the first album to photographs from my parents' early relationship, images I'd seen before, but never with commentary that revealed their hidden significance. "Your mother was not the first foreign woman your father dated," she began, her voice carrying the tone of someone delivering unwelcome historical facts. My parents exchanged glances loaded with decades of unspoken tension. "There was another woman before Michelle, Japanese-American, very beautiful, very intelligent. Your father was quite serious about her." She turned the page to reveal photos of my father with a woman I'd never seen before. Elegant, professionally dressed, standing beside him at what appeared to be business functions. "What happened to her?" I asked. "I happened to her," my grandmother replied with the satisfaction of someone who'd won a war through superior strategy. "I explained to your father that marrying outside his race would limit his business opportunities and complicate his children's lives unnecessarily. I presented him with evidence of colleagues who'd made similar choices and suffered professional consequences." My mother's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. "Your father ended that relationship and began dating Korean women exclusively. For 2 years, he followed my guidance and courted several very suitable young ladies from appropriate families." She flipped through photos of my father at formal gatherings, always with different Korean women, elegant, conventionally beautiful, exactly what Korean society expected for a successful businessman's wife. "But then he met your mother at that international business conference, and all of our careful planning became irrelevant." Her voice carried the weariness of someone still fighting a battle she'd lost decades ago. I looked at my mother, trying to understand how this history had shaped her marriage and her child-rearing choices. "Did you know about the previous woman?" "Your father told me about Keiko on our third date," my mother replied. "He wanted me to understand that dating me wasn't a rebellion against his family's expectations. It was a choice he was making despite having already learned how expensive such choices could be." "Expensive?" I asked. My grandmother answered by opening a second photo album, this one filled with newspaper clippings and business documents. "Your father's import business lost 3 major contracts in its first 5 years of operation. Not because of poor service or competitive pricing, but because key clients became uncomfortable working with someone married to a black woman." The revelation hit like a physical blow. 3 contracts? The Samsung partnership your mother mentioned, plus deals with Hyundai and LG Electronics, contracts that would have established your father as one of Seoul's premier import facilitators. She spread the documents across the table like evidence of financial murder. Combined value over 5 years, approximately 850 million won. I stared at the numbers, trying to process the magnitude of what my parents had sacrificed. You lost 850 million won because of racial prejudice? We chose to prioritize love over profit, my father said quietly, appearing in the doorway still wearing his pajamas. But the consequences were real and lasting. My grandmother continued her historical presentation with the relentlessness of someone who'd been waiting 28 years to make this argument. The business recovered eventually, but only by targeting international clients who were more comfortable with diversity. Your father built a successful company, but not the company he could have built if he'd made conventional choices. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you're about to make similar choices, and you deserve to understand their full cost. Not just to you, but to everyone who loves you. She closed the albums with the finality of someone concluding a legal case. Your theatrical success will make your racial identity a public issue. Dating Park So-min will make it a political statement. Are you prepared for the professional and personal consequences of that level of visibility? My mother finally spoke, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Jae-sung, what your grandmother isn't telling you is that we made our choices freely, with full knowledge of their consequences. We never regretted choosing love over social acceptance. But you paid a price, I said. We paid a price for living authentically in a society that wasn't ready for our authenticity, my father corrected. The question you need to answer is whether you're willing to pay a similar price for the same authenticity. My grandmother stood, gathering her photo albums like weapons being returned to storage. I'm not trying to control your choices, Jae-sung. I'm trying to ensure you make them with complete information. Your parents' generation could afford to pioneer because their sacrifices remained largely private. Your generation will face public scrutiny that could destroy careers and relationships overnight. At the kitchen doorway, she paused for her final assault. That young journalist you're so taken with comes from a family that spent 3 generations building social standing through conventional choices. Do you really believe Park So-min will choose love over family pressure when the consequences become personal? After she left, I sat alone with my parents and the weight of family history I'd never been permitted to understand. Why didn't you tell me about the financial sacrifices? I asked. Because we never wanted you to feel responsible for choices we made freely, my mother replied. And because we hoped the world would be different by the time you faced similar decisions. Is it different? My parents exchanged glances that carried 28 years of shared struggle. Different enough, my father said finally. But not easy. It never becomes easy. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. So-min's name appeared on the screen, and suddenly my grandmother's predictions about family pressure and relationship sustainability felt like prophecies rather than fears. Answer it, my mother said gently. Some conversations can't be postponed forever. But as I reached for the phone, I wondered whether I was answering a call from someone who would help me face whatever came next, or from someone who would ultimately realize that loving me cost more than she was prepared to pay. The choice between truth and protection had never felt more impossible. We need to talk. So-min's voice through the phone carried an urgency that made my stomach clench with anticipation of disaster. Can you meet me at Hongdae Park in an hour? The location was significant, public enough to prevent dramatic emotional displays, neutral enough to avoid the intimacy of our previous riverside conversation. I arrived to find her sitting on a bench beneath bare cherry trees, her usual composed professionalism replaced by visible agitation. My grandmother knows about us, she said without preamble when I approached. More specifically, she knows everything about us, including details about your family that I never shared with anyone. I sat beside her, leaving careful space between us that suddenly felt like a chasm. How much does she know? She knows about your mixed heritage, your parents' marriage, your father's business losses, and your recent theatrical performance. She also knows that I've been writing articles about diversity in Korean entertainment. So-min's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white with tension. But most importantly, she knows that I've developed feelings for you that go beyond professional interest. The weight of exposure settled over me like a net. How did she find out? Because Korean grandmothers have intelligence networks that would impress government agencies. She's been friends with your paternal grandmother for 6 decades, and apparently they've been sharing information about their family's problematic choices for years. I laughed bitterly. Your grandmother and mine have been conspiring against us before we even met. It's worse than conspiracy. It's strategic warfare. So-min turned to face me directly, her expression carrying the gravity of someone delivering life-altering news. She's given me an ultimatum. End our relationship immediately, or face complete removal from family support, financial resources, and social connections. The words hung between us like a death sentence. What kind of removal? No funding for my journalism career, no family connections for professional advancement, no financial safety net if my career fails. Complete social exile from extended family networks, exclusion from family gatherings and celebrations, and public withdrawal of family approval that would affect my marriage prospects for the rest of my life. I stared at her, trying to process the magnitude of what her family was demanding. They're asking you to choose between me and everything else. Effectively, yes. The brutal simplicity of her situation made my throat tight with rage and helplessness. And if you refuse? Then I become a social pariah who chose foreign romance over family loyalty. In Korean society, that kind of reputation follows you forever. She paused, choosing her words with journalist's precision. My grandmother made it very clear that dating you publicly would be seen as a political statement that could damage not just my career, but my entire family's social standing. The cherry trees above us were bare, their branches creating stark patterns against the gray autumn sky. Around us, university students were studying, and couples were sharing casual affection. All of them existing in a world where love didn't require such impossible choices. What do you want to do? I asked, though I was terrified of her answer. I want to fight for us. I want to tell my family that love transcends their social prejudices, and that I'm willing to face whatever consequences come from choosing authenticity over conformity. Her voice carried conviction, but her body language suggested uncertainty. But I also understand that wanting something and being prepared for its costs aren't the same thing. So-min, you don't have to sacrifice your entire future for a relationship that's barely begun. Don't, she interrupted sharply. Don't make this decision easier by minimizing what we have. What's happening between us isn't casual or experimental. We both know that. She was right, but acknowledging the depth of our connection made the potential loss feel unbearable. My grandmother told me something else, she continued, her voice becoming softer, more vulnerable. She said that your family has already paid enormous costs for similar choices, and that watching you repeat their patterns would be tragic for everyone involved. My grandmother told her about the business contracts. Everything. The financial sacrifices, the social isolation, the ongoing struggle to maintain professional credibility while being seen as someone who makes unconventional choices. She painted a picture of your family's 28-year battle against social prejudice as a cautionary tale about the futility of fighting systems that are designed to exclude. I felt the weight of family history settling over our relationship like a curse. Maybe she's right. Maybe some battles can't be won, only survived. Or maybe, So-min said, reaching for my hand with fingers that trembled slightly. Some battles are worth fighting precisely because they can't be won easily. Her touch was warm against the November cold, but I could feel the uncertainty beneath her brave words. There's something else, she said. I've been offered a promotion at the Herald. International correspondent position based in New York, covering Korean cultural exports and global diversity issues. It would be a significant career advancement, and would remove me from immediate family pressure. The opportunity was perfect for her. Professional growth, geographical distance from family conflict, and work that aligned with her values. It was also an elegant solution that would allow her to escape the impossible choice her grandmother had created. When do you have to decide? 2 weeks. And if you stay, then I face my family's consequences and hope that what we're building together is strong enough to justify the sacrifices required to protect it. We sat in silence, watching students pass by with the casual confidence of people whose romantic choices wouldn't require strategic planning or family warfare. I envied their simplicity while recognizing that So-min and I had moved beyond the possibility of simple love. "I need to tell you something," I said finally. "If you choose to fight for us, you won't be fighting alone. But you will be fighting against systems that are designed to make people like me disappear quietly, rather than challenging their assumptions publicly. And if I choose New York, then you'll build an extraordinary career covering stories that matter, and you'll avoid the battle that destroyed my parents' financial stability and isolated them from their families for decades." She squeezed my hand tighter. "That's not an answer to my question. If you choose New York, I'll understand that love sometimes means recognizing when the costs are too high to bear. And I'll spend the rest of my life wondering whether I chose career advancement or cowardice." The conversation was becoming too painful to sustain. I stood, pulling her up with me, and we walked toward the subway station that would take us back to our separate lives and impossible decisions. 2 weeks, she said as we reached the entrance. 2 weeks, I agreed. But as I watched her disappear down the steps, I realized that 2 weeks wasn't enough time to solve problems that had been building for generations. The question was whether love could survive the weight of history, family expectations, and social systems designed to prevent exactly what we were trying to build. For the first time since choosing authenticity over performance, I wondered whether truth was worth the price it demanded from everyone brave enough to tell it. Director Choi's theater was packed for opening night of Mirror's Edge, but the audience felt different from our initial reading, more diverse, more international, and significantly more tense. Korean entertainment industry executives sat alongside foreign cultural attachés, progressive activists next to conservative critics, creating an atmosphere that felt less like a theater opening and more like a cultural battlefield. I stood in the wings wearing my natural face and a costume that emphasized, rather than minimized, my mixed heritage. Clothing that suggested both Korean and American influences, woven together into something new rather than apologetic. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see my parents in the third row, my mother wearing traditional hanbok while my father had chosen a Western suit. Their clothing choices perhaps unconsciously reflecting the cultural duality I was about to perform. More surprisingly, I spotted my paternal grandmother in the back row, sitting beside an elderly Korean woman I didn't recognize. Her presence felt ominous, like she'd come to witness either my triumph or my public destruction with equal curiosity. 10 minutes, the stage manager announced. My phone buzzed with a text from So-min. "Break a leg. Whatever happens tonight, you're already brave enough." She hadn't told me whether she would attend, and I hadn't asked. The uncertainty of her decision about New York hung over everything like a sword waiting to fall. Director Choi appeared beside me, his usual pre-show anxiety replaced by something approaching serenity. "You ready for this?" As ready as someone can be for voluntary exposure of everything they've spent their life hiding. Good. Because there are people in that audience who've come specifically to see if Korean theater is ready for authentic diversity, and others who've come hoping to prove it isn't. He adjusted his glasses with the nervous precision of someone whose career was also riding on the evening's reception. Either way, after tonight everything changes. The lights dimmed, and I walked onto that stage carrying not just my own story, but the weight of every mixed-race Korean who'd ever felt like they were performing acceptability rather than living authentically. The play began with Jin Woo, me, preparing for an audition, applying makeup to minimize his racial difference while practicing lines that demanded emotional authenticity. The irony was deliberate and sharp. An actor erasing his identity to perform someone else's truth. Every morning I wake up and negotiate with my reflection, I began, the opening monologue flowing with the ease that came from having lived these words for 26 years. Which version of myself will be acceptable today? Which parts of my story need to be edited for public consumption? The audience was attentive but reserved, waiting to judge whether the performance justified the controversy it had generated. I could feel their evaluation like a physical weight, but instead of making me smaller, their scrutiny somehow made me more determined to fill the entire space with my complete truth. The first act built to a confrontation between Jin-woo and his parents about the cost of their interracial marriage on his identity development. The scene was drawn directly from conversations I'd had with my own parents, dialogue that revealed the impossible position of children who inherit the consequences of their parents' courage. During intermission, I could hear murmured conversations from the audience through the dressing room walls. Korean voices discussing whether the play was too political, international voices praising its brave authenticity, and industry professionals debating its commercial viability. The second act required me to perform scenes about romantic rejection, professional discrimination, and the exhausting performance of proving worthiness to belong. The material was raw, honest, and uncomfortably specific about the ways Korean society excluded people who didn't fit conventional ethnic categories. But the climactic scene demanded something I'd never done publicly, a confrontation with a casting director who dismisses Jin-woo as not Korean enough for authentic roles. The scene was performed with an actor playing the director, but everyone in the audience knew we were reenacting real interactions that happened daily in Seoul's entertainment industry. You want authentic Korean stories? Jin-woo challenges the fictional casting director. Then let me tell you about learning perfect Seoul dialect while knowing that perfection would never overcome imperfect genetics. Let me tell you about loving this country while knowing it doesn't quite love me back. The words carried years of accumulated pain and frustration, but also newfound pride in refusing to apologize for existing as I was. When I delivered the final line, "I'm not half of anything. I'm twice as complete as anyone who's never had to fight for the right to be fully themselves," the silence that followed felt different from our earlier readings. This time, the silence carried recognition, rather than discomfort. The applause began slowly, scattered claps that gradually built into sustained appreciation. I could see faces in the audience, some moved to tears, others thoughtfully engaged, a few visibly uncomfortable but unable to deny the power of what they'd witnessed. But during the curtain call, as I bowed to acknowledge the audience's response, I caught sight of my paternal grandmother's expression. She wasn't applauding, but neither was she displaying disapproval. Instead, she was watching me with something that looked almost like recognition, as if she was seeing me clearly for the first time. After the performance, the lobby reception became a series of intense conversations about art, politics, and social change. Theater critics approached me with questions about whether Korean entertainment was ready for more diverse representation. Industry professionals discussed potential projects that could build on the play's themes. But the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source: the elderly woman who'd been sitting beside my grandmother. "You probably don't remember me," she said, approaching with the careful dignity of someone delivering important information. "I'm Park Halmoni, Somin's grandmother. We met briefly when you were children." My heart rate accelerated. "Park Halmoni, it's an honor to see you again. I came tonight because I needed to understand what kind of young man had captured my granddaughter's attention so completely." Her voice carried evaluation rather than warmth, but also curiosity rather than predetermined judgment. "Your performance was illuminating." "Thank you. I didn't say it was good, just illuminating." She paused, studying my face with the intensity that suggested important decisions were being weighed. You remind me of someone I knew long ago, someone whose story I never allowed myself to fully understand. Before I could respond, she continued, "My granddaughter is considering a job in New York that would advance her career significantly. Part of me hopes she takes it, because it would simplify everyone's life considerably." The words felt like ice in my chest. But another part of me remembers being young and having to choose between love and family expectations. I made the safe choice 60 years ago, and I've wondered ever since whether I chose wisdom or cowardice. She reached into her purse, pulling out a small, faded photograph. "This is the young man I didn't marry because my family convinced me he was unsuitable. He was Japanese-Korean, born in Seoul but raised in Osaka. My parents said dating him would complicate our family's social standing unnecessarily." I stared at the photo, seeing a handsome young man whose features suggested the same cultural duality that marked my own face. What happened to him? He became a successful businessman in Tokyo, married a Japanese woman, and built a beautiful life that didn't include me. She returned the photo to her purse with the careful precision of someone handling precious and painful memories. I married appropriately, raised successful children, and maintained my family's social reputation. But I never forgot, wondering what would have happened if I'd chosen love over convenience. Are you telling me this to encourage me or warn me? I'm telling you this because my granddaughter deserves to make her choice with complete information about its consequences, and because you deserve to understand that some family resistance comes from fear rather than prejudice." She prepared to leave, then paused for her final observation. "Your performance tonight reminded me that authenticity requires courage, but also that courage without wisdom can destroy the very things we're trying to protect. I hope you and Somin are wise enough to build something that can survive the storms you're choosing to weather." As she walked away, I realized that the most important member of tonight's audience had been someone whose approval could determine the future of my relationship with the woman I was falling in love with. The question was whether my performance had convinced her that love could transcend the social complications it created, or whether it had simply demonstrated how expensive such transcendence could be. I found Somin waiting outside the theater, leaning against the building's brick wall with her arms wrapped around herself against the November cold. She'd been crying, but had tried to hide the evidence with careful makeup repair that couldn't quite disguise the redness around her eyes. "How long have you been out here?" I asked, approaching with the caution of someone unsure whether they were walking toward comfort or goodbye. "Since intermission," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't stay inside to watch you pour your heart out on stage while knowing I might be walking away from us tomorrow." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "You've decided about New York? I've decided about what I can't live with," she said, pushing herself away from the wall to face me directly. But those aren't the same thing. Around us, theater patrons were leaving the building, their conversations animated with the energy that comes from witnessing something challenging and important. A few recognized me, offering congratulations on the performance, but most were too absorbed in their own discussions to notice the personal drama unfolding on the sidewalk. "Walk with me," Somin said, taking my hand with fingers that felt cold despite the evening's mild temperature. We moved through Hongdae's narrow streets toward the Han River, past late-night restaurants and bars filled with university students celebrating the end of another week. The normalcy of their lives felt foreign to me now, as if choosing authenticity had moved me into a parallel universe where every decision carried the weight of political statement. My family held what they called an intervention this afternoon. Somin began as we found a bench overlooking the water. My parents, both sets of grandparents, 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and my older brother. 14 people gathered to explain why dating you represents a fundamental betrayal of everything they've sacrificed to build our family's social position. I squeezed her hand. trying to offer comfort while bracing for the details of what had clearly been an emotional ambush. They presented their case like attorneys arguing before a jury. Evidence of your family's financial struggles, documentation of social isolation your parents have faced, examples of other interracial couples whose relationships ended under family pressure. She paused, wiping her eyes with her free hand. But the most damaging argument was about children. Children? They asked me to imagine raising mixed-race children in Korean society. Having to watch them face the same discrimination you've experienced, the same identity struggles, the same professional limitations. They painted a picture of perpetual marginalization that would be passed down through generations. The weight of their argument settled over me like lead. Everything they'd said was true. Korean society remained fundamentally uncomfortable with racial diversity, and mixed-race children did face ongoing challenges that purely Korean children could avoid. What did you say? I said that loving someone means accepting all of who they are, including the challenges that come with their identity. I said that avoiding those challenges doesn't make them disappear. It just ensures that people like you continue facing them alone. Her words carried a fierce protectiveness that made my chest tight with gratitude and terror. But then my grandmother showed me something that changed the conversation completely. So-min reached into her purse, pulling out the same faded photograph Park Halmoni had shown me at the theater. She told me about the Japanese-Korean man she didn't marry 60 years ago, and how that choice had shaped every relationship decision she'd made since. I stared at the photo, understanding now why Park Halmoni had attended my performance, and why our conversation afterward had felt so loaded with unspoken meaning. She said she'd spent 6 decades wondering whether she'd chosen wisdom or cowardice, and that watching me face the same decision had forced her to confront questions she'd never resolved. So-min's voice became softer, more vulnerable. But she also said that her generation's sacrifices were made to protect their families from social consequences that no longer carry the same weight. What does that mean? It means Korea has changed more than she realized. Interracial marriage isn't the social catastrophe it was in her youth. Mixed-race children aren't automatically excluded from opportunities. The problems are real, but they're not insurmountable anymore. The possibility of hope felt dangerous after so many years of assuming the worst. But there's something else, So-min continued, her tone shifting towards something more complex. My family's opposition isn't just about race. It's about visibility. Dating an actor means dating someone whose personal life becomes public entertainment. They're not just worried about having a mixed-race in-law. They're worried about having a mixed-race in-law whose career depends on media attention. The distinction was crucial and damaging. My choice to pursue acting as a mixed-race person meant that any relationship I built would exist under public scrutiny that could turn personal decisions into political statements. So the question isn't whether they can accept you, I said, understanding the true complexity of her situation. The question is whether they can accept the public attention that comes with accepting you. Exactly. And that's a much more complicated calculation. We sat in silence, watching Seoul's lights reflect on the river's dark surface. Around us, couples were sharing quiet conversations and casual affection, all of them existing in the privacy that fame and controversy had made impossible for us. I've been thinking about something you said at our first interview, So-min said finally. You asked why my story about diversity in Korean entertainment mattered to me personally. I deflected the question then, but I think I'm ready to answer it now. I turned to face her, recognizing the tone that preceded important revelations. My brother is gay. He's been in a relationship with the same man for 8 years. But our family pretends it doesn't exist because acknowledging it would complicate our social image. I've watched him perform heterosexuality at family gatherings while his partner remains invisible, excluded from celebrations and conversations, because his existence threatens our family's conventional appearance. The parallel was obvious and painful. I became interested in diversity stories because I understood what it meant to love someone whose identity your family considers problematic. I've watched my brother choose family acceptance over authentic relationship recognition, and I've seen how that choice diminishes everyone involved. Does your family know that you see the connection? They know, but they pretend they don't. Just like they pretend my brother's relationship doesn't exist, they'll pretend that their objection to you is about practical concerns rather than fundamental prejudice. The weight of family denial and systematic exclusion felt overwhelming. We weren't just fighting for our relationship. We were challenging patterns of avoidance that had shaped both our families for decades. "So what do?" I asked. So-min turned to face me directly, her expression carrying the gravity of someone who'd made a decision that would change everything. "We choose love over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, and hope over fear." Her voice carried conviction, but also recognition of the costs such choices would require. But we do it together, knowing that some battles can only be won by people brave enough to fight them publicly. And New York? New York will wait. This won't. She kissed me then, soft and certain against the backdrop of Seoul's lights and the weight of impossible choices. It was a kiss that tasted like courage and tears, like the beginning of something beautiful and the end of something safe. When we separated, I realized that choosing love had moved us beyond the point where retreat was possible. We were committed now to building something that could survive family pressure, social scrutiny, and the ongoing challenges of existing authentically in a world that preferred simpler stories. The question was whether we were strong enough to become the love story our families had been too afraid to write for themselves. So-min's article was published on a Thursday morning in the Korea Herald, with a headline that made my chest tighten with anticipation and dread. Mixed-race actors in Korean entertainment, the hidden cost of assimilation. I read it while sitting in a Starbucks near my apartment, surrounded by the comfortable anonymity of morning commuters who had no idea that my life was being dissected for public consumption. The piece was masterfully written, weaving personal stories with industry analysis and cultural commentary in a way that made systemic discrimination visible without sensationalizing individual struggles. So-min had interviewed 12 mixed-race entertainers, documented patterns of exclusion and accommodation, and presented evidence of how Korea's entertainment industry reinforced racial homogeneity through seemingly neutral casting decisions. But the section about me was more personal and revealing than I'd expected. Kim Jae-sung, has spent 3 years using MAC Studio Fix Fluid Foundation, 2 shades lighter than his natural skin tone before auditions. The 26-year-old actor, born to a Korean father and African-American mother, discovered that minimizing his racial difference increased his booking rate by approximately 40%. "I was erasing my mother from my face every morning," he admits, describing the psychological cost of constant performance. The article went on to detail our conversations about identity, authenticity, and the exhausting labor of proving worthiness to belong. She'd honored my story with the kind of nuanced understanding that made painful experiences feel meaningful rather than exploitative. But more significantly, she'd placed my story within a larger context of mixed-race Koreans navigating similar challenges across industries. The article revealed that entertainment was simply the most visible arena where Korea's discomfort with diversity played out through systematic exclusion disguised as aesthetic preference. My phone started ringing before I'd finished reading. Director Choi, my parents, agents I'd never heard of, and entertainment reporters all wanting to discuss the groundbreaking piece that had sparked important conversations about representation in Korean media. But the call that mattered most came from So-min herself, her voice tight with anxiety and excitement. "Have you seen the response?" she asked without preamble. "I'm still processing the article itself." "What kind of response?" "It's everywhere. Korean entertainment blogs, international media outlets, social media discussions about diversity and assimilation. The Herald's website crashed twice this morning from traffic volume. I felt a strange combination of pride and terror. Is that good or bad? It's necessary. But Jae-sung, you need to prepare yourself for what comes next. This kind of visibility creates opportunities, but it also creates targets. Within hours, her prediction proved accurate. My Instagram notifications became overwhelming. Thousands of new followers, hundreds of comments ranging from supportive to viciously racist, and interview requests from media outlets I'd never dreamed would notice someone like me. But more troubling were the industry responses. 3 casting directors I'd worked with previously called to discuss how the article might affect future opportunities. Their conversations were carefully coded, but the message was clear. Becoming known as a diversity activist could limit my access to mainstream roles that required actors to remain politically neutral. The most direct response came from Lee Sang-wook, the casting director who'd previously dismissed me as not Korean enough, but had offered me work after seeing my theater performance. The article complicates things, he said during a tense phone conversation. Productions are already nervous about casting mixed-race actors, and now you're associated with criticism of industry practices. It's going to be harder to position you as commercially viable. So, speaking honestly about my experiences makes me unemployable. Speaking publicly about discrimination makes you controversial. Controversial actors require special justification for casting, which limits opportunities to projects specifically focused on diversity themes. The Catch-22 was perfect and maddening. Staying silent about discrimination allowed it to continue, but speaking about it marked me as someone whose career depended on being discriminated against. That evening, I met Somin at a restaurant in Itaewon, choosing international territory where our conversation was less likely to be overheard by industry professionals looking for gossip to monetize. My editor wants me to write a follow-up piece, she said after we'd ordered. Reader response has been so intense that they want to explore the topic further. What kind of follow-up? Profiles of mixed-race Koreans in other industries, business, academia, politics, to show how entertainment reflects broader social patterns. She paused, studying my expression. But he also wants me to interview your parents about their experience raising a mixed-race child in Seoul. The suggestion made my stomach clench. My parents have spent 28 years trying to maintain privacy about their relationship. Asking them to go public now feels unfair. I agree, which is why I told him I'd only pursue the story if your family initiated contact. I won't ambush them for content. Her journalistic integrity was one of the reasons I'd fallen in love with her, but it also meant she understood the professional value of stories that others might protect for personal reasons. There's something else, she continued, her tone shifting toward more dangerous territory. My family read the article. I set down my chopsticks, preparing for bad news. My grandmother called this morning. She said seeing our relationship described in print made it feel more real and more threatening than when it existed only in family conversations. More threatening how? Because articles get archived, referenced, and cited. Our relationship is now part of the permanent record of contemporary Korean social change. If I marry you, that article will be discovered by future employers, colleagues, and anyone researching my professional background. The long-term implications were something I hadn't considered. In choosing to love publicly, we weren't just accepting current consequences. We were accepting that those consequences would follow us indefinitely. Did she say anything else? She said that reading about your family's financial sacrifices made her realize that marrying you would mean accepting similar sacrifices for our future children. She's not opposed to that necessarily, but she wants me to understand that choosing love over convenience is a decision I'll have to make repeatedly, not just once. The wisdom in her grandmother's observation was both encouraging and terrifying. My parents read it too, I said. My mother cried through the entire piece, but told me she was proud that I'd found someone who could tell my story with the respect it deserved. My father said the article was strategically risky but emotionally honest. That sounds like qualified approval. From my family, that's almost enthusiasm. We finished dinner while discussing the practical implications of increased visibility. Interview requests we should accept or decline, industry relationships that might change, and the ongoing challenge of building careers that didn't depend on hiding parts of ourselves. But walking home through Seoul's neon-lit streets, I realized that Somin's article had accomplished something I'd never managed alone. It had made my story feel like part of something larger than individual struggle. For the first time, I felt connected to other mixed-race Koreans who were navigating similar challenges in their own industries and relationships. The article had also forced Korea's entertainment industry to acknowledge discrimination it preferred to keep invisible. Whether that acknowledgement would lead to meaningful change remained to be seen, but at least the conversation was happening in public rather than whispered in private. Most importantly, it had established Somin and me as a couple willing to face public scrutiny for the sake of authentic representation. There was no going back to privacy or anonymity now. The question was whether we were strong enough to survive the attention we'd invited. The phone call that changed everything came at 3 a.m, jolting me from restless sleep with the particular urgency that only emergency contact carries. Director Choi's voice was tight with controlled panic as he delivered news that made my blood freeze. "The theater's been vandalized," he said without preamble. "Racist graffiti, broken windows, and a note saying that foreign influences need to be removed from Korean culture. The police are calling it a hate crime." I sat up in bed, trying to process information that felt surreal in the darkness of my room. Is anyone hurt? No injuries, but the damage is extensive. More concerning is the message this sends about public reaction to our work. His voice carried the weight of someone whose progressive ideals had collided with violent reality. "Jae-sung, I need to ask you something difficult." The pause that followed felt loaded with career-ending implications. "I'm meeting with the theater's board of directors tomorrow morning. They're questioning whether continuing the production is safe for cast, crew, and audiences. If I'm forced to choose between protecting people and protecting the message, what would you want me to do?" The question struck at the heart of every performer's nightmare. Being asked to choose between artistic integrity and human safety, between standing up for principle and protecting people you cared about. "What does your gut tell you?" I asked. "That we're being terrorized into silence by people who profit from maintaining the status quo. But I also can't ignore that continuing might put everyone at risk." I walked to my bedroom window, looking out at Seoul's sleeping skyline, while trying to understand how my choice to perform authentically had escalated into threats of violence against innocent people. "Give me 12 hours to think about it," I said. "If the board decides to cancel, I'll support that decision publicly. But if they're willing to continue with increased security, I want to finish what we started." After hanging up, I couldn't return to sleep. Instead, I sat at my desk reading comments on social media posts about Somin's article and my theater performance. The responses ranged from thoughtful support to vicious racism, with an alarming number of people calling for Korean entertainment to remain pure and authentic. But buried among the negativity were messages from mixed-race Koreans thanking me for making their experiences visible, from parents of biracial children expressing hope that society might become more accepting, and from young actors who said my story had given them courage to pursue careers without hiding their identities. At sunrise, I called Somin. "I heard about the theater," she said immediately. "Are you okay?" "Physically, yes. Emotionally, I'm trying to understand how authenticity became threatening enough to justify vandalism. Because authenticity challenges systems that depend on people staying invisible," she replied with the clarity that made her such an effective journalist. "Your story isn't just about individual success. It's about proving that Korean identity can include people who look like you. That's terrifying to people who've built their sense of belonging on exclusion." So what do? We decide whether we're strong enough to face whatever comes next, or whether the cost of courage has become too high to pay. Her words echoed Director Choi's question about choosing between message and safety. But they also carried a deeper challenge. Were So-min and I prepared for our relationship to become a lightning rod for broader social tensions about race, identity, and belonging in contemporary Korea? There's something else, she continued, her tone shifting toward more personal territory. My family held another emergency meeting yesterday. This time, they presented me with an ultimatum that's more specific than their previous pressure. My heart rate accelerated. What kind of ultimatum? End our relationship within 1 week, or face complete financial and social exclusion from family networks. But they also offered an alternative. Accept the New York position, maintain family relationships, and they'll support a future marriage to someone more suitable. The calculated cruelty of her family's strategy was breathtaking. They'd created a situation where loving me required So-min to sacrifice everything stable in her life, while offering her a path to success that required abandoning me completely. What did you tell them? That I needed time to consider my options. But Jae-sung, they're not bluffing. My father showed me legal documents transferring family assets into trusts that exclude me if I marry outside their approved candidates. They've essentially written me out of the family inheritance if I choose you. The weight of what they were asking her to sacrifice settled over me like a physical burden. So-min came from generational wealth that provided not just financial security, but access to social networks, professional opportunities, and cultural capital that had shaped every advantage she'd ever received. How much are we talking about? I asked. Enough to buy a house, fund graduate school abroad, and establish financial independence for life. Enough to make choosing love over family approval genuinely devastating in practical terms. We sat in silence while I tried to process the magnitude of what her family was demanding. They weren't just asking her to break up with me. They were asking her to choose between love and every material advantage she'd inherited through 3 generations of conventional choices. So-min, you can't sacrifice your entire future for a relationship that's barely 6 months old. Stop, she interrupted sharply. Don't make this easier by minimizing what we have, or suggesting I should choose financial security over authentic love. That's exactly what my family expects me to do. But they're not wrong about the practical implications. Dating me means giving up advantages that could benefit any children we might have together. Or it means choosing to build different advantages based on authenticity rather than conformity. The conversation was becoming too painful to continue over the phone. Can we meet? I'm already dressed and heading to your neighborhood. Coffee in 20 minutes? Meeting at our usual cafe in Itaewon felt different now that our relationship had become public knowledge through her article. Other patrons glanced at us with the particular attention reserved for people who'd become minor celebrities through controversy. The theater vandalism changes everything, So-min said after we'd ordered. It proves that your visibility comes with real physical risks, not just professional challenges. Are you worried about your safety? I'm worried about yours. But I'm also worried about what backing down now would mean for other mixed-race Koreans who are watching to see whether standing up for authentic representation is actually sustainable. Her words crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate. Our relationship had become larger than our personal feelings. We'd accidentally become symbols of social change, carrying expectations and responsibilities we'd never chosen but couldn't abandon without consequences for others facing similar struggles. What if we took a break? I suggested, the words tasting like betrayal even as I spoke them. Let things cool down. Give our families time to adjust. Reduce the public pressure. And what message does that send? That love between people like us is acceptable only when it's invisible? That Korean society gets to decide which relationships deserve protection and which ones should be abandoned when they become inconvenient? She was right. But the alternative, continuing to fight public and private battles simultaneously, felt unsustainable. "I have an idea," she said, reaching across the table to take my hands. "But it's going to require more courage than either of us has had to demonstrate so far." Expression warned me that whatever she was about to propose would change everything irreversibly. "What kind of idea?" "The kind that stops letting other people control the narrative of our relationship and starts writing our own story publicly." Her words hung between us like a challenge that could either save us or destroy us completely. That evening, I made the most shameful decision of my adult life. I chose safety over courage, comfort over authenticity, and reputation over love. The vandalized theater, So-Min's family ultimatum, and the escalating public controversy had created a perfect storm of pressure that broke something essential inside me. I called Director Choi first. "I think we should suspend the production," I said, my voice barely steady enough to deliver the words. "The risks have become too high for everyone involved." The silence that followed felt like condemnation. "Jae-sung, if we close now, it sends the message that terrorist tactics work. Every mixed-race performer in Korea will understand that visibility comes with consequences the establishment won't protect them from. But if we continue and someone gets hurt, then we'll have fought for something meaningful. If we stop now, we'll have surrendered to exactly the kind of intimidation that's kept people like you invisible for decades." His words cut like accusations, but I was too terrified to be shamed into changing course. "I'm sorry, Director. I can't be responsible for putting other people in danger." After hanging up, I sat alone in my bedroom surrounded by the artifacts of my brief rebellion against conformity. Director Choi's script, So-Min's article about diversity in Korean entertainment, photographs from the theater's opening night when I'd felt like I was finally becoming myself instead of performing acceptability. All of it felt like evidence of a beautiful delusion that had collided with brutal reality. My phone buzzed with a text from So-Min. "Dinner tomorrow? We need to make some decisions about our future." Instead of responding, I turned off the phone and spent the night staring at the ceiling, while imagining all the ways our relationship could be destroyed by forces neither of us could control. By morning, I'd convinced myself that loving her meant protecting her from the social and professional consequences of being associated with me. I called her before sunrise. "I think you should take the New York position," I said without preamble, the words feeling like self-mutilation. "What are you talking about?" "Your family's ultimatum, the theater vandalism, the industry backlash against actors who become politically controversial. Everything is escalating beyond what we can handle. Taking the job in New York protects your career and gives both our families breathing room." The silence that followed was sharp with betrayal and disbelief. "Are you breaking up with me?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm trying to protect you from consequences that aren't fair, but are definitely real. By making decisions about my life without consulting me." The accusation was accurate and devastating. "So-Min, your family will disown you if you stay with me. Your career will be shaped by controversy rather than professional merit. Is that really what you want?" "What I want is a partner who fights for us when things get difficult, not someone who abandons ship the moment we face real challenges." Her words hit like physical blows, but I was too committed to my course of cowardice to change direction. "I'm being realistic about social forces that are bigger than our individual feelings. You're being a coward who's disguising surrender as protection." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the weight of choices that felt simultaneously necessary and unforgivable. But the real devastation came 3 hours later, when Director Choi called with news that made my stomach turn. "The theater board met this morning," he said, his voice carrying the weight of professional disaster. "They've decided to close the production indefinitely and terminate my contract. Apparently losing our lead actor created liability issues they weren't willing to accept. The revelation that my withdrawal had cost Director Choi his job felt like a knife through my chest. "I'm so sorry." Don't apologize, Jae-sung. Understand. Your decision to prioritize safety over authenticity just proved to every progressive director in Seoul that mixed-race actors will abandon challenging work when it becomes personally costly. You've set back authentic representation by years. After he hung up, I realized that my choice to protect everyone had actually destroyed the very thing I'd been trying to protect. The play was closed, Director Choi was unemployed, and other mixed-race performers would face increased skepticism about their commitment to challenging projects. Worse, I demonstrated exactly the kind of unreliability that casting directors used to justify avoiding controversial actors. My attempt to minimize risk had actually confirmed every prejudice about mixed-race performers being too politically complicated to cast in mainstream projects. The irony was perfect and crushing. In choosing safety, I destroyed the credibility I'd spent years building. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house, carrying the weight of failures I couldn't begin to explain. I found my mother in her garden, tending to plants with the gentle precision that had always calmed my childhood anxieties. "You look terrible," she said without preamble, studying my face with a maternal intensity that could diagnose problems I hadn't even recognized myself. "I ended things with So-min and withdrew from the play," I said, the words feeling like confessions at a tribunal. My mother set down her gardening tools, giving me her complete attention in the way that preceded the most important conversations of my life. Why? The question was simple, but devastating, because I couldn't explain my choices without admitting that I'd let fear overcome every principle I claimed to value. Because the consequences were becoming too dangerous for everyone involved. Dangerous how? The theater was vandalized. Her family threatened to disown her. Industry professionals warned that controversy would limit my career opportunities. The excuses sounded pathetic, even as I spoke them. And you decided that avoiding those consequences was more important than fighting for what you claimed to believe in? The gentle disappointment in her voice was more painful than anger would have been. I was trying to protect people I care about, by abandoning them when they needed your courage most. The accusation settled over me like a truth I couldn't escape. I had abandoned everyone, Director Choi, So-min, other mixed-race performers, and ultimately myself, at the moment when courage mattered most. "What do I do now?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would require more bravery than I possessed. "You decide whether you want to spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd been strong enough to fight for what you claimed to love." That evening, I sat alone in my bedroom, surrounded by the silence of bridges I'd burned and opportunities I'd destroyed through cowardice disguised as wisdom. But somewhere in that silence, I began to understand that some mistakes can only be corrected by becoming the person you should have been in the first place. The question was whether it was already too late to salvage anything from the wreckage of my own fear. In the 3 weeks following my spectacular act of cowardice, I wrote 17 letters to So-min that I never sent. They filled a drawer in my desk like evidence of ongoing emotional paralysis, each one an attempt to explain choices that felt more inexplicable with every passing day. Letter number 1. I know you think I abandoned you, but I was trying to protect you from consequences that would have damaged your career permanently. Letter number 7. I've been thinking about what you said about courage, and I realized that I confused fear with wisdom, selfishness with sacrifice. Letter numbered 14. Your family was right about the practical implications of loving someone like me, but they were wrong about whether those implications make our love less valuable. None of the letters felt adequate to explain how someone could claim to love authentically while choosing to live inauthentically, how someone could advocate for courage while demonstrating cowardice, how someone could build a career on not hiding while hiding from the most important relationship of his life. My apartment had become a monument to regression. The Mac Compact had returned to its place on my bathroom counter, My morning routine again, including the ritual of erasing evidence of my mother's heritage before facing the world. I'd accepted 2 commercial auditions that required me to play the foreign friend, roles that allowed Korean audiences to feel internationally sophisticated while maintaining comfortable distance from actual diversity. The performances were flawless and hollow, my authenticity buried beneath layers of professional accommodation that felt familiar but no longer comfortable. But the real punishment came through the industry's response to my withdrawal from director Choi's play. Word had spread quickly that Kim Jae-sung was unreliable under pressure, willing to abandon challenging projects when they became personally costly. Instead of protecting my career, my choice to prioritize safety had marked me as someone whose courage couldn't be trusted. Casting directors who'd shown interest after my theater performance now avoided my agent's calls. Progressive directors assumed I was more interested in commercial success than artistic integrity. Conservative directors continued to see me as too foreign for authentic Korean roles. I'd managed to alienate everyone simultaneously. The most painful reminder of my failures arrived through entertainment news coverage of director Choi's situation. Unable to find alternative funding after the theater terminated his contract, he'd accepted a position teaching high school drama in Busan, a talented artist exiled from Seoul's theater scene, because he'd trusted me with work that required unwavering commitment. But the coverage that destroyed me emotionally was a follow-up article So-min published about the closure of Mirror's Edge. She never mentioned my name or quoted our private conversations, but her analysis of how promising diverse productions could be shut down through strategic intimidation and performer unreliability was obviously about my betrayal. The piece concluded with a paragraph that felt like a surgical strike against everything I'd claimed to represent. The most effective way to maintain systemic exclusion is to convince marginalized people that fighting for inclusion is too dangerous to be sustainable. When performers from diverse backgrounds withdraw from challenging work at the first sign of resistance, they inadvertently prove that authentic representation is a luxury that can be abandoned when it becomes inconvenient. Reading those words was like seeing myself accurately described as the person I'd never wanted to become. Someone who'd used his marginalized identity to gain attention and opportunities, then abandoned that identity when it required genuine sacrifice. On a rainy Thursday evening, I ran into So-min at Gangnam Station during the evening rush hour. The encounter was inevitable in a city like Seoul, but felt like divine punishment for crimes I was still trying to understand. She looked extraordinary, professional, confident, carrying herself with the poise of someone who'd made difficult choices and learned to live with their consequences. When she saw me, her expression didn't show anger or hurt, just the polite distance reserved for acquaintances whose significance had expired. "Jae-sung," she said, nodding with the courtesy Korean social training required. "So-min, how are you?" "I'm well. I accepted the New York position. I leave next month." The news hit like a physical blow, though I'd known it was inevitable after my decision to end things between us. "That's wonderful. The international experience will be incredible for your career." "Yes, it will be." She paused, studying my face with journalist's objectivity rather than lover's concern. "I heard about your commercial work. You seem to be building the kind of career you always wanted." The observation was technically accurate and emotionally devastating. I was building exactly the career I'd thought I wanted. Safe, commercially viable, and requiring minimal personal risk. "And you're building the kind of career you deserve," I replied, meaning it completely. "I hope so." She adjusted her bag, preparing to leave. "I'm glad you found a path that works for you." The words carried finality that made my chest tight with the understanding that this might be the last conversation we'd ever have. "So-min," I said, though I had no idea what I wanted to say next. She waited with the patience of someone granting a small courtesy to a former acquaintance. "I hope New York brings you everything you're looking for." "Thank you. I hope Seoul does the same for you." After she disappeared into the crowd, I stood alone in the subway station, surrounded by thousands of people living their lives with the kind of routine certainty I'd voluntarily abandoned and been unable to rebuild. That night, I wrote Letter Number 18 to So-min, but this one was different from all the others. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, and I'm not asking for second chances I don't deserve. I just need you to know that loving you was the most authentic thing I'd ever done, and losing you was the most cowardly. You were right about courage requiring consistent choice rather than single moments of bravery. I chose fear when you needed me to choose love, and I will spend the rest of my life understanding the cost of that choice. For the first time in 3 weeks, I didn't put the letter in the drawer with the others. Instead, I sealed it in an envelope with her name written in careful Korean script, carrying it with me like a confession I might someday have the courage to deliver. But as I fell asleep that night, I realized that courage wasn't something you could save up for future use. It was something you practiced daily or lost permanently. The question was whether I could learn to be brave enough to deserve the love I'd thrown away, even if that love was no longer available to claim. 6 months after destroying everything I claimed to value, I found myself sitting in another sterile audition room, but this time the experience felt different. Instead of hope mixed with anxiety, I carried the hollow competence that comes from performing without purpose, executing skills that no longer connected to genuine ambition. The role was for a television drama about international business. I would play a mixed-race consultant who helps Korean companies navigate global markets. It was exactly the kind of diversity casting that allowed productions to appear progressive while avoiding any meaningful examination of racial dynamics. My character would be successful, well-dressed, and safely exotic without being threatening. Kim Jae-sung. The casting assistant's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I entered the familiar environment of judgment and evaluation, but instead of my usual careful preparation, I felt detached, as if watching someone else perform the ritual of professional validation. The casting director was someone new to the industry, young enough to represent the supposedly more progressive generation that would finally create opportunities for actors like me. Lee Min-jung studied my headshot with the intense focus that suggested she was looking for something specific. "I've heard interesting things about your work," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Particularly your theater performance last year. Mirror's Edge, wasn't it?" The mention of Director Choi's play made my chest tighten with familiar shame. Yes, though the production was suspended indefinitely. Because of the vandalism and security concerns? Among other factors. She nodded, making notes that I couldn't decipher from my position across the table. "I'm curious about your decision to withdraw from that production. Can you walk me through your reasoning?" The question was more personal than standard audition material, and I recognized the particular tone of someone probing for character assessment rather than acting ability. I felt that the risks to other cast and crew members had become disproportionate to the artistic goals we were trying to achieve. "Interesting. And do you regret that decision?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. Most casting directors avoided discussions that moved beyond professional qualifications into personal reflection. I regret that circumstances made it necessary. That's not what I asked. Lee Min-jung set down her pen, giving me her complete attention in a way that felt more like therapy than audition. "Do you regret the decision itself?" The honesty in her voice made deflection feel impossible. "Every day." "Why?" "Because I let fear disguise itself as wisdom, and I abandoned people who deserved better from someone they'd trusted with important work." The admission hung in the air between us like evidence of professional suicide. Most casting directors wanted actors who could be relied upon to complete projects, regardless of external pressures. "Tell me about the fear," she said. "I was afraid of being responsible for other people getting hurt. I was afraid of becoming unemployable because of political controversy. I was afraid of losing the acceptance I'd spent years building. The words came easier than expected, as if I'd been waiting months for someone to ask the right questions. And now? Now I understand that avoiding those fears meant becoming someone whose approval isn't worth having. Lee Min-jung leaned back in her chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't interpret. Kim Jae-sung, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. I'm not casting for a television drama. I'm a documentary filmmaker researching a project about mixed-race Koreans in entertainment, and I've been conducting these fake auditions to understand how recent industry changes have affected performers from diverse backgrounds. The revelation made my blood freeze with embarrassment and recognition. Everything you just told me was recorded, she continued, though not unkindly. But before you panic, let me explain why this conversation was necessary. She reached into her bag, pulling out a folder thick with documents and photographs. I've been tracking the careers of 12 mixed-race Korean performers over the past 5 years, documenting patterns of opportunity and exclusion. Your story, particularly your choice to withdraw from Mirror's Edge, represents something significant about how systemic pressure operates to maintain the status quo. I stared at her, trying to understand whether I was being studied, exploited, or offered some kind of opportunity. Your withdrawal wasn't unique, Jae-sung. It's part of a pattern where mixed-race performers are encouraged to take on challenging, authentic work, then pressured to abandon that work when it generates controversy. The system creates visibility that feels like progress, then eliminates it when it becomes inconvenient. She opened the folder, revealing photographs and interview transcripts from other performers who'd faced similar pressures. The documentary I'm making is about that pattern. How Korean entertainment creates the appearance of diversity while maintaining structural exclusion through strategic intimidation and performer isolation. Are you asking me to participate? I'm asking if you're ready to tell the complete truth about your experience, including the parts that make you look weak or cowardly or human. The offer was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. Participating in her documentary would mean examining my failures publicly, acknowledging the full extent of my cowardice, and possibly destroying what remained of my commercial viability. But it would also mean finally choosing authenticity over reputation, truth over comfort, courage over safety. What would participation involve? On-camera interviews about your family background, your career strategies, your relationship with identity and belonging. Conversations with your parents about raising a mixed-race child in Seoul. And most importantly, honest discussion about your withdrawal from Mirror's Edge and its consequences for your career and your understanding of yourself. She paused, letting the implications settle. The documentary won't make you look heroic, Jae-sung. It will make you look human. The question is whether you're ready for that level of exposure after spending months hiding from the consequences of previous exposure. I thought about the 17 letters I'd written to So Min and never sent, about Director Choi teaching high school drama in Busan, about the MAC compact sitting on my bathroom counter like evidence of ongoing capitulation to systems that diminished me. If I participate, what happens to my acting career? I don't know. But what's happened to your acting career since you chose safety over authenticity? The question was brutal and accurate. In choosing to protect my career, I'd actually destroyed it, becoming known as someone whose commitment couldn't be trusted under pressure. When do you need an answer? Take the time you need. But understand that this documentary will be made with or without your participation. The question is whether you want your story told by someone who lived it, or interpreted by people who observed it from the outside. Walking home through Seoul's afternoon traffic, I carried Lee Min-jung's offer like another impossible choice between safety and authenticity, between protecting my reputation and reclaiming my integrity. But for the first time in months, the choice felt clear rather than complicated. The question was whether I'd finally learned enough from my mistakes to make different ones. That evening, I called my mother and asked if we could talk, really talk, about choices and consequences, and the cost of courage in ways we'd never attempted before. She agreed to meet me at a traditional tea house in Insadong, neutral territory where difficult conversations could unfold with the gravity they deserved. I arrived to find her already seated, her hands wrapped around a cup of omija tea, her expression carrying the particular blend of concern and patience that had sustained me through 26 years of complicated identity navigation. "You sounded different on the phone," she said when I sat down across from her. "I feel different. Like I've been sleeping for months and finally woke up to see what I'd destroyed while I was unconscious." She studied my face with the intensity that had always made lying to her impossible. "Tell me about it." I described the fake audition, Lee Min-jung's documentary project, and the choice I was facing between continued invisibility and public examination of my failures. As I spoke, I watched my mother's expression shift from curiosity to understanding, to something that looked like relief. "You're considering participating," she said when I finished. "I'm considering finally telling the truth about who I've been and who I want to become, even if that truth makes you look weak or cowardly. Especially if it makes me look weak or cowardly. Because pretending to be stronger than I am has cost me everything I actually valued." My mother sipped her tea, choosing her words with the deliberation that preceded the most important guidance she'd ever given me. "When I was your age, I made a choice to move to Korea, because I believed love could transcend cultural differences. That choice required enormous faith in possibilities I couldn't prove would work out. But it did work out. You and Father built a successful marriage and raised me here. We built a sustainable marriage, Jae-sung. Success is more complicated." She paused, letting the distinction settle. "We learned to navigate social pressure, professional consequences, and ongoing prejudice. But we paid prices for those choices that you never fully understood. The business contracts Father lost? The business contracts, yes, but also the social isolation, the constant vigilance required to protect you from discrimination we couldn't prevent, and the ongoing performance of being grateful for acceptance that should have been automatic." I thought about the parallel between her experience and my relationship with So-min, how both had required choosing love despite social forces designed to make such love unsustainable. "Do you regret the choice?" "I regret that the choice was necessary. I regret that Korean society made our love a political statement, rather than a personal decision. But I don't regret choosing your father, and I don't regret raising you here." She leaned forward, her voice becoming more intimate. "But here's what I want you to understand about courage, baby. It's not a single decision you make once and then live with forever. It's a daily practice of choosing authenticity over comfort, truth over convenience, love over safety. The moment you stop practicing courage, it starts to atrophy. Is that what happened to me? Courage atrophy? You got out of the habit of being brave. You started choosing comfort over growth, safety over authenticity. And once you started making those choices, they became easier to make again. The diagnosis was accurate and devastating. How do I start practicing courage again? By making different choices. Small ones at first, then larger ones as you rebuild your capacity for discomfort. I thought about Lee Min-jung's documentary, about the possibility of examining my failures publicly, about what it would mean to choose truth over reputation after months of choosing the opposite. "There's something else I need to tell you," I said, "about So-min and the way I ended things between us." My mother's expression suggested she'd been waiting for this part of the conversation. I described the family pressures, the public scrutiny, and my decision to end our relationship by convincing her to take the job in New York. As I spoke, I watched disappointment spread across my mother's face like water staining paper. "You pushed away someone who loved you because you were afraid of the consequences of being loved authentically?" I was trying to protect her from social backlash and family rejection. "You were trying to protect yourself from having to fight for something that would have required sustained courage." The accusation was brutal, and completely accurate. She's in New York now, building the career she deserves, probably dating someone whose love doesn't require her to sacrifice her family relationships. And you're sitting here feeling sorry for yourself instead of fighting for what you claim to value. It's too late, Mom. I destroyed everything. Director Choi lost his job because I abandoned the play. So Min moved to another continent to escape the complications I created. I've spent 6 months proving that I'm exactly as unreliable as every prejudiced casting director assumed mixed-race actors would be. My mother set down her teacup with the decisive motion that preceded her most important observations. Jae-sung, let me tell you something about timing and second chances. Your father and I didn't get married the first time he proposed. I turned him down because I was afraid of the social complications an interracial marriage would create. This was information I'd never heard before. You said no? I said no, moved back to Atlanta, and spent 8 months trying to convince myself that I was being realistic about cultural differences. But every day I was away from him, I understood more clearly that I was choosing fear over love. What changed your mind? I realized that the regret of not trying would be worse than the consequences of trying and failing. So I moved back to Seoul, told your father I'd made a mistake, and asked if he was still willing to build something difficult and beautiful together. The parallel to my situation with So-min was obvious and painful. But what if he'd moved on? What if I'd waited too long? Then I would have learned that some mistakes can't be corrected, and I would have lived with that consequence. But at least I would have tried to repair damage instead of accepting it as permanent. She reached across the table, covering my hands with hers. Baby, I'm not saying you can fix everything you've broken. I'm saying that choosing to try is the first step toward becoming someone whose choices can be trusted again. Where do I even start? With the documentary. Tell your story honestly, including the parts that make you look weak. Then figure out what other repairs are possible and which ones aren't. And if So-min never forgives me, then you'll have learned that some consequences are permanent, and you'll spend the rest of your life making different choices because of what that loss taught you. Walking home through Insadong's traditional streets, I carried my mother's words like a map toward redemption that might or might not be achievable. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving towards something rather than away from it. That night, I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Lee Min-jung. I want to participate in your documentary. When can we start filming? Her response came within minutes. How about we start with you throwing away that Mac compact you've been using again? Some stories begin with symbolic gestures. I walked to my bathroom, picked up the foundation that had become my daily ritual of self-erasure, and dropped it into the trash can without ceremony. Looking at my reflection in the mirror without artificial enhancement, I saw someone I recognized but hadn't talked to in months. Kim Jae-sung, mixed-race Korean actor, son of an interracial couple, former lover of a brave journalist, and current practitioner of recovering courage. It wasn't the face of someone who'd made perfect choices, but it was the face of someone ready to start making different ones. The documentary filming began on a Tuesday morning in Lee Min-jung's studio, a converted warehouse in Mapo-gu that felt more like an art installation than a production facility. Professional lighting equipment surrounded a simple interview setup: 2 chairs, neutral background, and cameras positioned to capture truth rather than flattery. Before we start recording, I want you to understand what we're creating, Lee Min-jung said, as sound technicians adjusted microphones and checked audio levels. This isn't a redemption narrative where you apologize for past mistakes and emerge heroic. This is an examination of how systemic pressure operates to maintain exclusion through individual choices. I nodded, though the distinction felt academic compared to the reality of sitting under hot lights preparing to dissect my failures for public consumption. The goal isn't to make you look good or bad, but to make visible the mechanisms that convince marginalized people to marginalize themselves. She settled into the chair across from me, her professional demeanor softened by genuine curiosity rather than journalistic exploitation. "Are you ready?" As ready as someone can be to examine their own cowardice on camera. "Then let's begin. Tell me about the first time you realized that being mixed race would affect your opportunities in Korean entertainment." The question launched us into territory I'd avoided for months, but speaking the truth felt easier than I'd expected. Maybe because I'd spent so long living with lies that honesty felt like relief rather than exposure. I described the childhood school play where I'd been relegated to foreign merchant roles, the gradual understanding that my appearance would always require explanation, and the decision to begin using makeup to minimize my racial difference. When you started using foundation to lighten your skin tone, how did it feel? Like I was solving a practical problem. If casting directors were more comfortable with actors who looked conventionally Korean, then looking more conventionally Korean seemed like smart career strategy. But that's not what I asked. How did it feel? The persistence in her voice forced me past strategic explanations toward emotional honesty. Like I was erasing my mother from my face every morning. Like I was agreeing that half of who I am was problematic enough to require daily correction. The admission hung in the studio air, recorded permanently now, impossible to retract or soften. And yet you continued the practice for 3 years. Because it worked. I booked more auditions, got taken more seriously, became more acceptably Korean with each application. Until director Choi offered you a role that required you to appear as yourself. Until I was offered the chance to stop performing acceptability and start performing authenticity. Lee Min-jung leaned forward, her questions becoming more pointed. "Tell me about your relationship with Park So-min and how it affected your career decisions." This was the territory I'd been dreading, where personal failure intersected with professional cowardice in ways that revealed the full extent of my character weaknesses. I described meeting So-min, her article about diversity in Korean entertainment, and the escalating public attention our relationship had generated. As I spoke, I could feel myself being honest about details I'd spent months avoiding through careful rationalization. When her family threatened to disown her if she continued dating you, what was your response? I convinced her to take a job in New York. I told myself I was protecting her from consequences that weren't fair, but I was actually protecting myself from having to fight for something that would have required sustained courage. And when the theater was vandalized, I withdrew from the production, telling myself I was preventing other people from getting hurt. But I was actually preventing myself from having to face the consequences of choosing authenticity over safety. The words felt like surgical instruments cutting away layers of self-deception I'd built up over months of avoiding accountability. So, in both cases, your relationship and your career, you chose protection over authenticity when the stakes became high enough to require real sacrifice. Yes. What did those choices cost you? Everything I actually valued. Director Choi lost his job because I abandoned the production. So-min moved to another continent to escape the complications I'd created instead of resolved. And I became known in the industry as someone whose commitment couldn't be trusted under pressure. The interview continued for 3 hours, covering family history, identity development, and the ongoing challenge of existing authentically in a society that preferred simpler narratives about race and belonging. But the most difficult moment came when Lee Min-jung asked about the letters I'd written to So-min, but never sent. You mentioned writing to her repeatedly after ending the relationship. Why didn't you send those letters? Because they were attempts to make myself feel better about choices I wasn't willing to change. Writing them was easier than doing the work of becoming someone whose choices could be trusted again. Do you still have those letters? I reached into my bag, pulling out the envelope I'd been carrying for weeks. The 18th letter, the one that had been different from all the others. This is the one I was planning to send. But I realized that apologies without changed behavior are just another form of performance. Read it. The request felt like the final exposure, the complete stripping away of privacy that documentary filmmaking demanded. I opened the envelope, unfolding pages covered in my careful handwriting, and began to read the words I'd written during my lowest moment of self-recognition. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, and I'm not asking for second chances I don't deserve. I just need you to know that loving you was the most authentic thing I'd ever done, and losing you was the most cowardly. You were right about courage requiring consistent choice rather than single moments of bravery. I chose fear when you needed me to choose love, and I will spend the rest of my life understanding the cost of that choice. My voice broke slightly as I finished reading, the studio lights making the pages blur with moisture I hadn't expected. What would you say to her now, if she were here? The question forced me past prepared apologies toward truth I'd been avoiding for months. I would tell her that she was right about everything, that I wasn't brave enough to fight for us when fighting became necessary, that choosing to love me authentically would have required sacrifices she deserved better than, but that those sacrifices would have been worth making if I'd been strong enough to make them with her. And what would you say to other mixed-race Koreans who are watching this documentary? That authenticity is a daily practice, not a single decision. That courage atrophies when you stop using it. And that the cost of choosing safety over truth is always higher than it appears. After the cameras stopped rolling, Lee Min-jung and I sat in the studio's silence, surrounded by equipment that had just recorded the most honest self-examination I'd ever attempted. "How do you feel?" she asked. Like I just performed surgery on myself in public. Painful, but necessary. The documentary will be ready for screening in 2 months. Are you prepared for the response? I'm prepared for whatever response comes from telling the truth. That's something I should have learned to do years ago. Walking home through Seoul's evening streets, I felt different. Not redeemed, but honest. Not heroic, but authentic. Not perfect, but complete in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The Mac Compact was still in my bathroom trash can, and my reflection in the mirror still showed someone whose features told 2 stories simultaneously. But for the first time in months, those stories felt like chapters in the same book, rather than competing narratives requiring constant reconciliation. I was Kim Jae-sung, mixed-race Korean actor, son of immigrants who'd chosen love over convenience, former lover of a brave journalist, and current practitioner of recovering authenticity. I wasn't half of anything. I was twice as complete as anyone who'd never had to fight for the right to be fully themselves. The question was whether I'd learned that lesson early enough to build something meaningful from the wreckage of my previous choices. If you've ever found yourself choosing safety over authenticity, or comfort over courage, then you understand the weight of second chances. Because what happened next would determine whether redemption is possible for someone who'd failed at the moments when failure mattered most. 6 months after the documentary aired, I stood once again in an audition room, but this time everything was different. The space was the same. Sterile white walls, fluorescent lighting, the familiar arrangement of chairs and judgment. But the person sitting across from those casting directors was someone I finally recognized in mirrors. Kim Jae-sung, the casting director said, reviewing my updated portfolio. I have to ask about the documentary. Twice as complete, generated significant discussion about representation in Korean entertainment. I nodded, no longer afraid of conversations about my choices or their consequences. I'm happy to discuss it. Your honesty about using makeup to appear more Korean, about abandoning the theater production, about ending your relationship due to family pressure. Weren't you concerned about how that would affect your career? The question was fair, direct, and no longer terrifying. I was more concerned about what continuing to lie would cost me as a person. Turns out, honesty is less damaging than I'd been taught to believe. What I didn't tell him was about the letter that had arrived 3 weeks after the documentary's premiere. International postmark, familiar handwriting, my name written in the careful Korean script I'd memorized from 18 unsent letters. Jae-sung. I watched your documentary from my apartment in New York. My grandmother called me afterward, the first time we'd spoken since I left Seoul. She said seeing you examine your failures with such honesty had reminded her why she'd once fallen in love with someone Korean society considered unsuitable. She also said she'd been wrong about timing, that some love stories don't follow conventional schedules, and that courage can be learned even after it's been lost. I'm not saying this to give you false hope about us. Too much has changed for simple reconciliation. But I wanted you to know that watching you choose truth over reputation made me proud of the person I fell in love with, even if I couldn't stay in love with the person you became. I'll be returning to Seoul next month to cover the presidential election for the Herald. Perhaps we could have coffee, as friends who once helped each other learn what authentic courage looks like. So Min. The audition continued, but my mind kept returning to that letter, to the possibility of second chances that didn't erase past failures, but built something new from their lessons. The role we're casting, the casting director continued, is for a mixed-race Korean journalist covering social change in contemporary Seoul. The character needs to be someone audiences trust to tell difficult truths about identity and belonging. I smiled, understanding for the first time how my biggest failure had prepared me for my most important work. I think I understand that character's story, I said. Walking home through Seoul's familiar streets, I passed the theater where director Choi's play had been canceled. A new production was advertised, another story about identity and belonging, featuring a cast that looked like Korea's actual diversity rather than its imagined homogeneity. Progress was slower than I'd hoped, but faster than I'd feared. That evening, I sat in my apartment without MAC foundation, without carefully managed lighting, without the performance of acceptability that had defined my adult life. In the bathroom mirror, I saw someone whose features told two stories simultaneously: Korean and African American, immigrant son and Seoul native, failed lover, and recovering human being. I wasn't half of anything anymore. I was twice as complete as anyone who'd never learned that authenticity requires daily choice, that courage is a practice rather than a feeling, and that love, of others, of self, of truth, always costs more than comfort, but delivers more than safety ever could. The compact powder was still in the trash can, where it belonged. The real face looking back at me was finally someone I was brave enough to be.